All right. So anyway, if anybody was listening to this, I'll kind of edit this all together for the downloadable. But we're going to go ahead and kind of do a new start on this. Hopefully, we are coming through. No video now. Unfortunately, I'd love to be sharing this, but I'll make sure that you guys get a chance to see all three of these books and all the images that we're going to talk about right on the GDApod.com website. There will be a special. We're going to create an Oak Island page just for sharing some of this information, and maybe I can even get our guest this week. A great guy, James McQuiston, who I've been talking with for a little bit. So I finally get a chance to just sit down and talk with him one-on-one about this whole thing. Because like I was saying before, if you don't know what the Curse of Oak Island is, you've probably been living under a rock recently, because it's one of those things that's become kind of a pop culture icon on television, because it's the whole question of is it, isn't it? And it's personified on a small speck of an island just off the Nova Scotia coastline, in an island that nobody would have looked twice at, and it seems like there's a secret that this place is hiding. My guest today is author, historian, and like I said, author of 3 books on the Curse of Oak Island, or on Oak Island. Oak Island, Missing Links, Oak Island 1632, and Oak Island Nights. He spent a lot of time with Marty and Rick Lagina out on the island itself, and has postulated quite a few hypotheses himself, and has kind of come to his own conclusion what he thinks the truth is of the island itself. Now, James, like I said earlier, but this time we're going to just nail this, get this over with. I'm sick and tired of the other thing. Thank you, first of all, for coming to GDA and coming onto the show. This is an important subject, and I love talking about this.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I have to say that it probably was not a coincidence that we both went through some agony here getting this hooked up, because I was just telling you about the Curse of Oak Island really being how things go wrong and equipment fails and all that, and I had a chunk of Oak Island in my hand, a little drill piece, and I was just about to show you, so we couldn't have been closer to Oak Island unless we were there when everything went down. But so we're just this is just a vid or an audio stream.
This is an audio stream at this point. We will share. I will get some photographs from you, and we can share these items right on the website so people can see it.
So, just to recap a little bit, I've written a number of books, and I had written most of what I write about is Scottish history. And even if it's a book about somebody in America, I always link it back to their Scottish roots. So back in 2014, my work was recognized by a couple of Scottish historians, and they nominated me for a fellowship with the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland.
That's amazing.
And what that is it's a group of historians that was first founded in 1780, and they work with the Scottish National Museums, and they work with the Scottish National Records. And so I was approached with this fellowship, and I had to go through about a 3-month testing period, you might call it, or whatever. But eventually I was made a fellow. Mm-hmm. So the advantage that gave me was that I was able to go to them when I had specific questions about Scotland. And if they couldn't answer them, they would send me over to the Scottish museums. And if they couldn't answer, they'd send me to the Scottish records. So I had an awful lot of people over in Scotland, a lot of historians helping me. And in addition, the 2 people that I mentioned originally, the other 2 historians that nominated me, one of them had a video from a gentleman that had passed away, but he was considered the expert on the Knights Templar in Scotland.
Oh, wow.
And he sent me that video. It was quite a couple hour long video. And then the other gentleman, I was working with him in recognizing a battle that took place and its rightful place in history. And one of his friends had gone through all the official documents of Scotland to find every record he could on secret societies. And, well, secret orders, not so much like the Freemasons, but like the Knights Templar and the Knights of St. John and all that. And so he had written up a report for their group, and so this gentleman sent me a PDF of that. So here I am getting all this great information. This was even before I even thought about Oak Island. This was just cool information I was getting. So I was writing a family book. I was actually rewriting it, and our family holds the title of Premier Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia. And the person that actually holds it, his name is Sir Ian MacDonald McQuiston, and McQuiston is the Gaelic form of McQuiston. Huh. And so, and I emailed with him a few times, but I had no idea what that was even about. I just knew that he existed. So, as I was writing the book and I was rewriting that part, I was also independently watching The Curse of Oak Island, and I'm sitting there one night and I'm thinking, Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia, Oak Island, Nova Scotia, maybe they have something to do with each other. So I wrote them, and they set up a call with Paul Troutman for about an hour, and we talked about what little bit I did know about it, and he asked me a ton of questions. So I started answering questions, and the people I was answering to expanded out and eventually included Doug Carroll, who then kind of picked up the ball once they realized that this wasn't just another crackpot bit of information, because they get so many theories there, it's unreal. And not all of them are crackpot, but a lot of them are pretty sketchy and they don't come with a lot of backup. So after hundreds of emails, they suggested I write a book, and that was the first one, Oak Island Missing Links. And that's more generic of how easily it would have been to actually sail over to Nova Scotia from the Norwegian countries or the British Isles, because you have several stepping stones on the way. You have the Faroe Islands, Greenland, Iceland, Newfoundland before you get to Nova Scotia, whereas when Columbus went across, he went right straight across 3,800 miles with no place to stop. They only had to go about 2,000 miles, and they had 5 places they could stop on the way. So part of it was that. Part of it was an interpretation of who I think the Micmac legend of Glooskap really represents. Because it's been said that that's Henry Sinclair, and it's pretty hard to get the name Glooskap out of Henry Sinclair, but it's not very hard to get it out of the name that I came up with. And also in the Zeno narratives, which are a description of the Zeno brothers who supposedly had helped a Scottish prince sail over to the New World, they called him Zichmini, and I came up with a phonetic and historical interpretation of who Zichmini might be. So those are in that book. I also identify a couple of items from Scotland that would be invaluable if they were ever found. They're both lost right now. And I also did a considerable chapter on the Knights Templar. So that was what the first book was about, but it didn't narrow anything down. I mean, I was slowly narrowing it down. So by the time I'd sent a few more 100 emails to Doug, and particularly to Doug and Rick, became my point people, Rick Lagina, they suggested another book, because I had narrowed this down to who I thought the people were and what year, which was 1632. And so that was the book they asked me to come up to Oak Island in 2018 to talk about. I'd been there in 2017 to talk about my first book, and I was in the war room. And as a matter of fact, I hold one claim to fame that nobody else will ever be able to claim, because I gave the very last presentation in the old war room. And I didn't know it was going to be that, but after I did my presentation, we were outside standing around, and I thought, well, I'm going to go back into the war room and look around a little bit. And there was a lady in there photographing each section of wall and then taking everything off it. And I said, what's happening? And she said, I'm taking everything down to the new war room, but it's top secret, she said. And I said, all right. So what I found out was that, first of all, that was just an old shed that was converted, and it was not in good shape. So they were concerned of bringing guests in, something would happen. Secondly, it didn't have good air conditioning, and they had a lot of artifacts and articles and photographs on the wall, and they were concerned that these might get ruined. If they needed to get them into a better controlled environment. And third, the old war room was right across the causeway when you drive over to the island. So if they were in the middle of filming and a bunch of tourists came over, got out, a bunch of noise, So they built a somewhat identical war room. I think it's just a hair bigger, but it's up around the bend, and you can't get to it except through a gate. But it's got good air conditioning, and the ceiling is higher where the lighting can be better, because they really, we went through a lot here today. Me trying to set up my studio in my office and everything. Well, they were somewhat hodgepodged in the old war room, and this allowed them to get better lighting up in the rafters and everything. So it was a considerable improvement. But anyway, so that was 2017. They did not use that footage, although everybody on the Oak Island team was kind of enthralled with my ideas. So in 2018, I went up, and Doug and I were working on a project about a medallion, which I'm going to tell you about. It's a pretty exciting development.
Yeah.
But so we discovered a lot more about it, and we eventually got the gentleman who found it back in the 70s to show it for the first time in public. And he showed it to just me and Doug and Rick. And my wife was in the room too, and she was taking photographs like crazy. We were in the war room, and Prometheus couldn't get a team down there because it was Saturday morning early, and they'd worked a long week, and they said their crew was scattered everywhere. We didn't know the guy was coming. He just called up and said, "All right, I'll come down and show it to you." So we all scrambled to the island. And I tried, when I got there, Rick was on the phone with Prometheus trying to convince them to get a crew down there, and they were telling them they couldn't. And he said, he hands me his cell phone, says, "Here, you talk to him." So I'd only talked to this gentleman a couple times, and that was about boring things like car rentals and hotel rooms and stuff. But I said, this is such a big deal. And he said, I'm telling you, it'd be 4 hours if I could even find a couple guys. He said, they work like 10-hour days for 5 days. They're gone on a Saturday morning. So he said, I'm just not going to find them. So the gentleman brought it in and showed it to us. And I'll get into that in a minute.
Uh-huh.
But so because we developed a lot of more information on that, and because I was developing more information as I was heading up there and on my way back out because of questions they asked, I knew I had to write the third book. They had suggested the first two, and they sell them up there in their museum. But I knew I had to write this third book because I added to the who and the when, I added the what and why it was buried and why nobody could come back to get it. So I couldn't leave it out with just those first two books, even though they stand on their own and they've got a ton of information in them. I had to write this third book, and that's Oak Island Nights with a K.
Mm-hmm.
And a local newspaper wrote it up as Oak Island Nights with an N, and I thought, well, people are going to think it's some kind of romance novel or something, but this is a serious book. And when you show it on the show, however you do end up showing it, on the front of that is the medallion, and that photo is the best photo taken of it. The only photo before that day, which was in 2018, was a Polaroid that was taken of it laying down on a linoleum floor, and it was so small you could you had no idea what size it actually was. There's nothing for reference, and it was blurry, and they knew it had French writing on it, and they knew it was from 1671, and that's all Doug could tell me. Well, I went hunting the way I do into old documents, and I found that it was an Order of the Garter knighthood medallion from England, or Great Britain, actually, by then. And there were only 3 given out that year. So I went on the search of where they all were. One had been in Sweden, and it was stolen with a bunch of items and melted down for the gold and the silver, because it's a silver medallion.
Yeah.
The other one in the British Museum.
Yeah.
The other one is in the British Museum, and the Swedish Museum was able to give me photos of it, even though it's destroyed. So I had the front and back photos of that. The British Museum gave me the front and back photos of the one there. and they know who those two belong to. So there was only one person left in all of history that this third one could belong to.
Uh-huh.
Well, he happened to be the financier of a treasure hunter.
Really?
And that treasure hunter found a Spanish galleon down near the Dominican Republic, and he went back to England to get financing. The king was he was under pressure because he was Catholic in a relatively Protestant environment, and he just didn't have a lot of money. So this other gentleman, his name was Christopher Monk, he had just retired from all of his responsibilities and titles and everything, just to live the good life in his later years. So he decided he'd sponsor this other gentleman, whose name was William Phipps, to go find the treasure. And he did, and he brought it back to England. And one currency calculator says it was worth billions of dollars, and some stories about it say that it actually saved Great Britain, because they were so destitute at the time that it saved them. Well, one of the things that this Christopher Monk had given up when he gave up all his titles was his Order of the Garter medallion.
Okay.
So the thing was laying around, basically. Phipps could not be knighted officially because he was born in America and had no real property, but he was knighted. He was given an honorary knighthood. So what I'm thinking happened, because he took Christopher Monk's and King James billions of dollars, they just gave him the silver medallion and said, that wasn't being used anyway, and said, here, you're officially a knight now, even though you're not eligible to be one. Now you're a knight. So he came back to America claiming to be a knight, and they called him the New England Knight. And so he eventually went up to Nova Scotia to chase the French out, and the first place he hit was the place where my guys that I think buried the treasure were living. And he wrote in his book that he and his men were searching for plunder, which means stolen treasure, by land, by water, and underground. So he was there treasure hunting. He wasn't there just to chase the French out. His personal motive was to treasure hunt. And then the medallion was found on the other side of Nova Scotia from there at the little town of New Ross. And I don't know if you've seen that on the show, but about 20 miles up from Oak Island, there's an old foundation there that they've been speculating who it belongs to. Some people said it was Templar. Some people said it was Henry Sinclair, whatever. Well, I found evidence that this other family that I'm going to get into had built a secret estate there. Huh. And this medallion was found. What the gentleman that was there with the guy that found it, he said we were playing a stone's throw over there from that foundation when he dug it up in the dirt. So my theory on that end of it, which doesn't pertain 100% to my overall theory, but it's just interesting because this is a medallion you can hold in your hand. It's an actual object, silver object, that can be dated. And my theory is that Phipps came across Nova Scotia hunting for this treasure that he knew about. He may have got in a battle and it got knocked off his chest. Now, two parts to that. Number one is at the admonishment when you became the knight was that you wore the medallion around your neck on a ribbon. Yeah. So just to follow the rules, he would have been doing that. But he also led 700 men. And so just like the boss wears a tie at work and the sheriff wears a badge when he goes out to arrest the bad guy, well, he was almost certainly wearing his medallion around his neck to show that he was the boss of these 700 people, and also because that's what the knighthood said he had to do. Yeah. And the medallion is somewhat compressed on the front. If you show a good photo of it to your listeners, see there's a dragon. It's St. George slaying the dragon. Yeah. And the dragon's body is somewhat compressed. Yeah, it looks a little flat. It looks almost like there's a double print on it, almost. Well, when you flip that over, on the backside there's a dent, and some of the lettering is smashed right in right there. Oh. So this thing experienced trauma somehow, and fairly severe trauma, because I don't think you could. I don't know what my two ideas are: that he was in battle with the French or with the Micmac First Nations tribes, because it was all wild country at the time.
Yeah, of course.
And it got hit with a club or something and fell off his neck, and he couldn't recover it because he was in the middle of a battle, and it got kicked into the dirt. Or he just dropped it while they were searching for, quote, plunder underground, and he just happened to lose it and didn't realize and he didn't know where to look. But, being a metal detectors, the kind of crazy stuff you find just laying in the oddest places.
Yeah.
And this was just laying a couple inches under the dirt right off the side of this foundation.
Yeah, I mean, I've even found a religious medallion from a Knights Templar. It was an old cross with the skull and crossbones on it in the middle of a farmer field where there was no horse path at the time. So I have no idea how it was there.
Well, and that was the thing that was bugging me so bad, is how it would end up. I mean, once I identified who it belonged to, then it was bugging me, well, how did it get there? And then when I found out the gentleman it was originally given to was the financier of a treasure hunter who ended up becoming the governor of Nova Scotia and wrote in his own book that he was searching for plunder underground, it kind of all came together.
And then, to be found 20 miles away from Oak Island as well.
Right.
That's too big of a coincidence. Now, it does.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm looking at the medallion. It looks like the part where the ribbon would have gone through. It looks like it's been slightly soldered or reconnected up there as well.
Yeah, and the thing is that the three medallions all have a different kind of connector. This one has this ring. The one in England has no connector at all.
Really?
And the one in Sweden had a chain that wrapped around the medallion and then had a couple links that came up to hook to the ribbon. So the chain itself was holding, it was wide enough to actually hold the medallion within it. So they all were, whether that happened through the years or whether they were originally done that way. But one thing about them is the fronts are absolutely identical on them all, because I took them into Photoshop, which I spent years in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Put them all on top of each other, and they all land exactly on each other. But the back sides are slightly different. And I think what happened was they minted the fronts and a piece of ivy around the outside on the back for maybe 10 years worth of them, because they didn't know each year how many knights were going to be necessarily inducted. So, and then they would go in imprint when on the day or shortly before the day that they would install them. They always install them all on the same day. All three of them would come, or their proxy would come, and the king would put the sword on their shoulders and all that, and come a knight. Well, the inner print that had the date and all that was slightly off on the backs of all three of them. So even though they're identical metal for that year, they're not identical because of that slight skew of the type compared to that ivy ring. So every one of them would be an absolute one of a kind in history, even though they looked identical.
It makes it slightly easier to identify which one belongs to who as well.
Yeah. So the kicker for all of this, just for this part of the story, and believe me, this isn't my main theory, but it kind of supports it, and this is where it gets into supporting it. The gentleman that was given Nova Scotia in 1621, his name was William Alexander, and his personal secretary, who wrote down handwrote all the documents that pertained to the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia and the whole attempted settlement there, was a man named James Philp. Well, William Phipp's father was named James Phipps. James Philp disappears from Scotland in 1640 when Alexander dies. He sold his land and left. 1640. Okay. And shortly after that, James Phipps arrives in Maine, which is just across the water from Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. And so I looked up the Phipps and the Philp name, and they're both just contractions of the name Phillips. They're essentially the same name. And so it could be the same person. And there's no further record of James Philp in Scotland, and there's no previous records earlier than James Phipps in Maine. So both men disappear from their respective countries in a way, or one disappears in one country and another one appears in the other country within a few years, and William Phipps goes looking for the Alexander treasure. So if that isn't what really happened, there's one hell of a bunch of coincidences.
Yeah.
And there's no other story. There's nobody else has any story about how this all ties together at all. There's nothing out there, because believe me, I spent almost 3 years now researching, and this is all there is. And it all comes out of documents. That's what I love about it is, people can disbelieve me and say I'm just another quack, or I'm looking for my 15 minutes of fame, or trying to sell books or whatever. But I put the documents in the book. I in most cases, I don't reproduce the entire document because, first of all, it's written in whereas and tither and all that, from 1600s, drive people nuts. But I put in the pertinent part of it that tells the tale, And so if somebody doubts me about it, all they got to do is go back and look at the document, and they can look up the full document online and read the whole thing if they want to, and see where I got it from. So that's what I think makes mine stand out from a lot of them, because there's a lot of speculation and maybe a lot of wishful thinking. And I'm not picking on everybody, because, everybody that puts out a theory thinks they've got the best theory, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Put it out there. But when we were walking down from the new war room back to the museum after my talk in 2018, it was just Rick and I walking down, and he said, yours is the best presentation we've ever had in the war room. And I said, oh, really? And he said, we get so many theorists here, and he said they have a theory, but they don't have any evidence. And they give us their theory, and then we sit and look at each other and think, well, what should we even ask them? We don't even know where to go from here,
Yeah, and you do see that a lot on the show, too.
He said, you came in here for 2 hours. You gave us a 2-hour presentation with all this documentation and evidence. And he said, I don't see a way to blow a hole in it. So, boy, you got to believe I was thrilled to hear that. And, when you're in the filming, first of all, you can only focus in one place at a time. You don't see the camera's view of the room. And you're trying to absorb everything as it's happening. But when I watched that final closing scene when I appeared on Curse of Oak Island, I was on April 9th. And the final scene, Rick was saying all these great things about it. And I knew he had been saying something nice, but I really couldn't have repeated it to you right afterwards. But they showed him, and then they showed Doug Kroll, and then they showed Charles. And Charles meant as much as anybody, because he's been doing this forever. His family lived on the island. In fact, some of his ancestors actually, signed legal documents as witnesses for the original 3 guys that found the money pit. Huh. So for him to say, and you back it up with facts, so when I watched that again, because I filmed it when it was, I couldn't help but get my iPhone out and film each section when they had me on there. And then when I replayed that, I thought, wow, that is so nice, because I really didn't absorb all that at that moment in time. It wasn't until I watched it again 8 months later, or however many months it's been, that I thought, wow, they really seem to like it. So anyway, to get off William Phipps and Monk, and that story goes on and on and on. Believe me, there's so much more to it, but I just tried to hit the high parts of it and the high parts of the medallion. But I want to jump back to Sir William Alexander.
Yeah.
What happened was the French had settled up in this one area called Port Royal, and that's on the leeward side of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia isn't an island, but it almost is. And the leeward side is much calmer. But the windward side is all jagged from the Atlantic waves hitting it and the storms and all that. So naturally, you'd want to settle on the leeward side so you wouldn't get beat up. So they settled there in 1605, and they were attacked a few times, but there were still remnants of them being there. When the people came over on the Mayflower, the Puritans, there were 3 ships, I believe, that came eventually, but they settled the Plymouth colony, and their title to the Plymouth colony included Nova Scotia, even though they didn't have possession of it, but it was written that it did. So they were upset that these French Catholics, because this was in a time period when, Protestants and Catholics were killing each other right and left, and torture and everything. Just incredible time.
Yeah.
So they wanted those Catholics out of there. So they made an appeal to King James I, he had been he still was James VI of Scotland. He was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. And when she was killed by Queen Elizabeth out of jealousy, and then when Queen Elizabeth died without any children, James was the natural person to take over for England. So everybody thinks England took over Scotland. Well, in a sense, Scotland took over England, because King James came down from Scotland and became King James I of England and Ireland as well. And he's the one that actually coined the expression Great Brittany, but they didn't use it for a while to describe the country. But he, in his own writings in 1605, he coined that expression. So they petitioned him to do something about the French up there. And they didn't call it Nova Scotia. They called it Acadia or Acadie.
Yeah.
And so he went to his good friend, William Alexander, who had followed him down from Scotland, and he was on his privy council, and he held a gazillion titles in government, and eventually was named Secretary of State for life. So he was a very powerful man. And so he approached him and said, do you think you could get some of our fellow Scotsmen to go over there and take care of this? Because Scots were known at that time particularly as mercenaries. They were fighting all over Europe and in Ireland as mercenaries.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
So he said, well, we've got a New France, a New England, and a New Spain. If you give me this territory of Acadia as New Scotland, I'll do it. So the king said, okay. So they wrote up a charter in Latin, and New Scotland in Latin is written Nova Scotia. So that's how the name came about, and that was in 1621. Well, it was a barren land except for the Micmac First Nations, possibly one other tribe, and then the small group of French people living at Port Royal. So Alexander sent his first ship over in 1622, and it never made it there because of a storm, and it floundered in Newfoundland. So in 1623, he sent a second ship, and they picked up 10 survivors in Newfoundland, and they went on down to Nova Scotia, and right down below Oak Island and New Ross, about 70 miles below it, they established a little colony called Lukesboro, because their ship was called the St. Luke, so they called it Lukesboro.
Okay.
And it was short-lived, but 1623 is the year that 3 different sources say that a secret estate was built at New Ross for William Alexander. And that's the foundation up there where the medallion was found.
20 miles north of Oak Island.
Right up Gold River, of all rivers, right up Gold River.
Hopefully a good sign.
The sources are the Alexander family themselves. They moved out eventually. They got forced out by Cromwell, and they formed Alexandria, Virginia. But That's one source. Another source is a family by the last name of Nauss, Nauss. And I actually talked to the man who made the comment that his ancestors helped build the secret estate there. He was a little bit reluctant to talk too much about it, and he actually made the comment that maybe the Lagina should be speaking to him instead of me. So, but he did agree that he was the man who made that comment. And then the third source was a Micmac First Nations member who told the landowner at the time that his ancestors had helped build the secret estate in 1623. So the point is that three different sources, and they're disparate sources, number one, but one of them's down in Virginia, they all make the same claim. It would be kind of foolish not to believe it, because we have a foundation there that nobody can explain, and we have three different groups of people saying, yeah, that was William Alexander's foundation. So they returned, or some of them returned, but they left their ship behind. They left the St. Luke behind, so that tells me they left some of the settlers behind too. And then they got a load of fish, and they loaded them onto other boats up in Newfoundland and headed back to England on those boats. So Alexander was finding it hard to get anybody to agree to go over there because it was barren, and there was danger involved between the French and the Micmac. So he devised this knighthood called the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, which my family holds the premier knighthood right now. And the idea was that you would, for a certain fee, which was currency calculators drive you nuts, because it all depends on what if you're basing it on gold, if you're basing it on land, on average wages, or the business influencing the economy. And how they explain that, I mean, I'm going to give you the layman's explanation, but if you're a millionaire in the United States, you're one of many millions of millionaires. But if you're a millionaire, say, in Bangladesh, you're going to carry a lot more weight. Your millions are going to be worth more. Even if you went to Mexico or Honduras or whatever, they're going to be worth more. So if you base it on that kind of a currency calculation, it jumps it way up. So the fee for this knighthood, because you had to pay a fee, ranged from in the range of 30 to 50,000, using some lesser calculators, up 500,000.
Wow!
But regardless, it was a big chunk of cash to become a knight. Well, the other thing you had to provide were 6 men of standing. They had to be like a blacksmith or a minister or a serious farmer or something. They didn't want broken men, because that was one of the big problems with Scotland at the time, was that they had broken men all over the highways, robbing people and sleeping in the big towns, and begging and all that. And he wanted to create a utopia, William Alexander. And it's all spelled out in my book.
Yeah.
The whole thing about his idea for this utopia. That's Oak Island Nights book.
No, yeah, that's what I was just about to ask, if that was Oak Island Nights.
But Oak Island 1632 also has an awful lot of background information. And I would recommend, if anybody wants to read deeper into this, start with Oak Island Nights and then work backwards, because you'll see once you understand the big story, then you'll get the details as you go backwards into the books,
and then you'll see how it all ties together.
Yes.
Okay.
So and I know this gets complicated. I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can, but
no, it's good.
They did create the knighthood in 1625, and people started signing up. Well, one of the questions Rick asked me in my 2017 visit was, are there any connections to the Knights Templar? And I said, well, I know there's some, but I never really went down that route. So when I got back, I looked into it, and overall, of all the knights that signed up, which is like 120 roughly, about 25% of them have some kind of link to the Knights Templar. But more importantly, if you only looked at the first couple dozen that signed up, they all had links to the Knights Templar. So I realized then, well, this is kind of in a way, it's a spinoff. It's like the heirs of the Knights Templar became the Knights Baronet. But where it really gets crazy is that William Alexander's two sons, William Jr. and Anthony, became the world's first two Freemasons. Huh. And his partner, a guy named Alexander Strachan, and I always refer to him as Al Strachan because it gets to be too many Alexanders in the story. But Al Strachan became the world's third Freemason. And the Edinburgh Lodge number 1 in Edinburgh has the actual document still. And I found a facsimile of it, and it has their signatures on it. It was July 3rd, 1634. And there's a big story about how they got in as what they call them non-operative, because they didn't operate as a stonemason. It was a stonemasons guild until that day. And these gentlemen were not stonemasons, and there was a political reason why they got in there. But they became what we think of today as a Freemason. And it was only 3 years later in the same lodge where they started using the name Freemason, the word Freemason. Mm-hmm. So now you have a tie between the Knights Templar, the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, and the Freemasons. An absolute tie. So I started looking at all these families, and I did a lot of that in 1632, where I could find a Knights Templar. In the same family, I could find a Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia. Then I could find a Freemason. And in one family, the McLean family, it even goes a step further, because John Smith, who was one of the three guys that found the money pit, his mother was a McLean. Well, the McLean family, there was a Lachlan McLean, who was a Knights Templar. Later on, there was a Lachlan McLean, who was a Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia. A little later on was James McLean, who was the second Grand Master of the French Freemasons, when the Scots were helping the French set up their Freemason lodges. And then a little later on, you got John McLean Smith out Oak Island finding the money pit treasure. So the connections are just incredible, and they continue even today. I sent some more stuff out I have a mailing list of like 6 people now, principal people, 3 Oak Islanders and 3 Prometheus people, where I send my research as I'm finding it, because I want them to be up to date on what I'm finding. And some of it I can't talk too much about, but it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, to where there isn't any doubt in my mind that the fix was, well, I have to tell you about the treasure, but a treasure was stolen. The fix was in to steal the treasure. It was taken to Nova Scotia to finance Nova Scotia. Alexander was going to set himself up as the king there. The French took it back over, and Oliver Cromwell was busy in Great Britain trying to get rid of all royalty. Harry Alexander was the best buddy of the king. So they found themselves between a rock and a hard place. And I believe I have quite a theory, but it's very believable, and it's backed up by some science, including carbon dating and weather records. They were forced out in 1632. They got there in 1629. They were forced out in 1632 by the French in April. You could not have sailed across the North Atlantic in April. You can't even do it today on most days, because if you look at the NOAA weather records it was April 27th was the day they absolutely had to be gone by. You look at the weather records for April 27th for 2017 and 2018, they had waves 35 feet high. They had high winds, they had fog, and they had freezing spray. And the freezing spray is what would take a ship down, because I don't know if you ever watched The Deadliest Catch, where they go out and catch the crabs. Those metal boats get covered with ice, and they take a wooden bat and go out there and break the ice off. Well, if you were trying to do that to a ship from the 1600s, you'd beat the thing to death. Plus, you couldn't take, because the NOAA even said that some waves can be higher than twice as high as the norm. They gave the norm as 20 foot. So they're talking about a rogue wave could be up to 40 foot. Well, there's no way those ships, they had a draft of about 12 to 16 foot, and there's no way that a 40-foot wave, or possibly even a 20-foot wave, wasn't going to just dump them right over. Yeah,
especially even if they were pointed nose first right at it.
Yeah, and they knew they were forced to take everything with them, or they were allowed to take everything. I have to say that, because it was a semi-friendly evacuation, although some Scots stayed behind and fought. But they were told in the order to leave to take everything, including their gold and silver that was specifically on the list, which was interesting, and all their cannons and rifles and all that. They were allowed to take it all. But if you can imagine, they're on the leeward side of Port Royal, and the weather's reasonably okay. It's early spring. You come around the bottom of Nova Scotia, the first thing you're going to see is the Atlantic.
Yep.
The terrible storm. You head up the coast of Nova Scotia, and the deepest bay, which by deep I mean deep into the land, not necessarily deep down, but deep into the land, is Mahone Bay, and at the back of the bay is Oak Island. Oak Island is near the shore, some people think it even had a natural causeway back then. You can get water, you can dig for water on it, fresh water.
Really? Okay.
And it just happens to be right below the secret estate up at New Ross. So and they had given that land to their only French ally in Nova Scotia, which I can tell you about that in a minute. But so there was no better place for them to go to wait out the storm than to go to Oak Island. And so people say, well, why Oak Island? Well, if you look at all the evidence, you'll see why. And my story, the Alexanders were finally forced out by Cromwell in 1656. So the time period I'm talking about essentially starts at 1620 with the Mayflower people, but more importantly, at 1621 when Nova Scotia was founded. It goes on up to 1656 when the Alexanders finally left. Well, I took the carbon dating records for wood that both Fred Nolan and Dan Blankenship, you probably know those two names, two old timers, the early records they sent in for carbon dating, and they ranged from way back in the 1500s up into the 1700s. But if you put them on a bar graph, the only place they all crossed over was 1620 to 1660. Exactly my time period.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's no other place where they do cross. No, there is no other record that shows a concentration of carbon dating dates that equals a somewhat traumatic time in Nova Scotia. And so to get back to what's buried there, and I'm going to reveal a lot of that's in my book, but believe me, there's 100 times more in there, and there's all the details, and the other books, like I say, give the background information. So if anybody's truly interested in this, the first book they would need to buy is Oak Island Nights, because they're going to get a story that's never been told by anybody before, except for from me. But so in 1620, first of all, if you look back at all the records about Sir William Alexander in Nova Scotia, he complains constantly about not having enough money. And so for his adventure, not for his personal use, but for his adventure. And so his ship failed in 1622. He didn't get a ship all the way there till 1623. Mm-hmm. But in October of 1622, and this is the whole key right here, in October of 1622, his partner, Alexander Strachan, or Al Strachan, as I call him, the world's third Freemason, steals a massive treasure from one of the richest people in Scotland, and he steals the guy's wife along with it. Well, he is tried, but he's not tried before a jury. He's tried before the Privy Council. Well, William Alexander has been in the Privy Council for many years at this point and essentially runs it. His trial is delayed 2 more times. So over a 1-year period, it was set for 3 different days. It was never, ever held. The following year, right as the Knights Baronet were being established, Al Strachan and all the other people involved were given complete remission for their crime. Huh. So nobody went to jail for stealing this gigantic treasure. And where I found the treasure was in the history of Lodge Number 1 of Freemasons in Edinburgh, in their book. Was the treasure ever recovered? That was my next question. Yeah. So I went to the Society of Antiquaries and asked them. They didn't know. So they sent me to about 3 different emails at the Scottish National Museums. I wrote all them, explained it all. They didn't know. They sent me to about 3 different emails at the Scottish National Records. They did not know what happened to the treasure, but they did know that it was a true story because they pointed me to the Privy Council minutes where the trials had been delayed a couple times. And then when the king finally gave Strachan remission for his sins in early 1625, just before they created the Knights Baronet. So that verified the story, that the story was true. And then I found snippets of the treasure in 2 other books, but the full treasure is spelled out in this Masonic books. So it was after this all happened that he was accepted in as a Freemason. So and this isn't to in any way disparage Freemasonry, because this was way back when, and this was a lot of powerful Scotsmen involved, probably the most powerful Scotsmen that there were at the time involved. And I think the whole goal was they knew that Nova Scotia wasn't going to be a success. They were given all the land, but they knew if they didn't have money, nothing was going to happen. They stole the treasure. They took it with them when they went there in 1628. And when they were forced to leave, they didn't want to take it back to Scotland because people were probably still wondering where the hell it was. And they may have had other things like clan treasures, because all the original people that signed up were the chieftains of the clans. And within those clans, there were tons of Templar connections. So they may have even had some Templar treasure, and they were trying to take it all there to finance Nova Scotia. And then when it went sour, they didn't want to take it all back they probably, didn't want to risk it getting dumped into the ocean during spring storms. They didn't want probably a lot of people back there to know that they even had it all. And they may have just thought this was a bump in the road, that, all that was going to disappear with the French, and they were going to be able to go back to their big plan. So I think that's why they buried it on Nova Scotia. And I think there's a chance that one of their ships wrecked. And that may be another reason that they had to get, they had all these belongings and all of the stuff, they had to do something with it. So their decision was to bury it. Now, Fred Nolan said that he found 11 places on the island where he felt that something had been dug out of the ground and dragged down to the coast.
Really?
Then there's also the money pit, and the McGinnis descendants said that those three original gentlemen had found 3 chests full of worth of treasure. They didn't say they found 3 chests filled with treasure. They said worth of treasure. And Fred Nolan had found 3 empty chests in the swamp area. So
when was that?
Well, he was there. He just passed away a couple of years ago, and he had been there for 50 years. So it'd be within the last 50 years.
He's the one that spent 40-something years on the island, right?
Yeah, and he was a surveyor by trade, so he surveyed the whole island. And when he passed away, his son did 2 things for the Laginas. Number one, he gave them permission to search his father's land, which they never had up until that day. And then secondly, he gave them all of his father's surveying drawings, that were massive drawings. Yeah,
very invaluable items.
They were so large because he was trying to demonstrate everything in perspective, and they were so big that when Rick rolled one of them out on the ground on one of the shows, he could actually crawl on it. It was like a car. So, and Fred Nolan had found a number of parts from ships in the swamp. And in fact, the Oak Island team has found some too. So the swamp itself, it's triangular, and it's kept away from the Mahone Bay, which is essentially the Atlantic Ocean coming into the bay, by Brim, which is a road. But that road was only built in the 1930s. And in the 2016 winter, it almost washed out. So if you could imagine no humans being there, and Mother Nature having her way with the area, it would have been a cove. So, the waters around Oak Island, this is another thing, that the waters around Oak Island, I've seen 2 different depth charts. They are as deep as 30 foot in some areas. Not right up to the island, but back a ways where you would normally anchor a tall ship. And then you would take a smaller tender or panace, they call them, or whatever, into land, with your treasure or whatever else you were taking in, or even a raft. So the ships could get there. Well, in addition to that, there is a direct wind tack from the open ocean almost to Oak Island. It goes into a yacht club that's just off to the right of Oak Island, but all you'd have to do is turn like 20 or 30 feet towards Oak Island. If you were following, the yacht club actually prints the map to show its members how to get in there without hitting bottom, And you could go right up their trail that they draw and then just make a slight turn to the left and you're parked at Oak Island.
Yeah.
And Doug had told me about it originally, but he didn't tell me about that map. I found that on my own, that yacht club map. But that verified what he had told me. So if you were going to ride a direct wind tack back in the 1600s into Mahone Bay, and you were using some kind of depth sounding devices, I think they used to use like rocks or weights on the end of ropes, and they'd give a reading where so many fathoms deep or whatever.
Yeah.
You would have taken that exact same path, and it would have taken you right back to the island, or right back to the back of the bay, and there was Oak Island. So people that say, well, there's lots of islands, well, a lot of the islands you couldn't sail a tall ship to them. There's 300 and some islands, but a lot of them you couldn't get to them unless you took a smaller boat a longer way to get to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, so he stole that treasure. I believe that's at least part of what was buried on the island. But what's really interesting about it is that he stole it from a man named Keith, who was the Marshal of Scotland. And his position was a little more than what we would think of a marshal in the United States. He protected the king, but he also protected the crown jewels. So whenever there was trouble for the king, he would take them and hide them at one of his castles. And he owned 30 castles.
Wow.
And he had just this incredible fortune that's on this list that they stole. And he was on his deathbed at the age of 70. And I think what happened was Strachan, and I think Alexander was in on it. He certainly was in on it in getting them off from the crime. But there were other people involved in it. I think they thought when he dies, all of this estate that he's got, this massive estate, is going to be all divvied up and caught up in court cases. People will be suing for 100 years over it, blah, blah, blah. Or we can just go and steal the damn thing and go finance Nova Scotia. And one of the partners of Al Strachan and William Alexander was William Keith, the very son of the man that was robbed.
Yeah. And
he was a partner with them. Now, if you were just robbed of a big inheritance, the last thing you do is go into a partnership with one guy who stole it and the other guy that got that guy off from getting arrested for it. So I think the fix was in. I think these people, this was right at the time that Alexander was going there. He was writing about how he needed money. They looked at this big fortune. They knew the guy was dying any day. They said, we're just going to go in, steal it, take it over there, finance the ships. Maybe they used some of it to finance, because they took 4 ships over. And it, their valuables ended up getting buried there. And so the next question would be, well, is there any proof that they're buried there? And 4 items have been found in the money pit that could be connected to this treasure list. And one of them is gold chain. The treasure list listed specifically 2 gold chains. Well, in 1897, a drill bit came up with 3 links of gold chain on it.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that, yeah.
That could be any gold chain, but at least it's on the list. The other thing is there's a lot of pottery. Well, Robert Dunfield, who had bulldozed the money pit area, he missed it by a little bit, but he had sent some pottery to Oxford University, and they dated it to the early 1600s, which is my time period.
Yeah.
Well, and on the treasure list, it said all the plenishings of these castles. Well, that is a uniquely Scottish word, but it essentially means the same thing as furnishings. It means all your day-to-day utensils and chairs and things that don't have a intrinsic value as treasure, like a piece of jewelry would, but they're still worth something.
So the stuff in the back of a U-Haul truck.
Yeah, exactly. So that could qualify for that. Now, it could qualify for other things, but because it was dated to the early 1600s and that was on the list, that's a good candidate. The other thing was on the list was 36 dozen gold buttons. And the reason why they had gold buttons back then was they would actually wear them on their suit coats, and then if they ran into somebody they owed money to, they would pop a button off and ask them if they could, settle the deal there. Well, they found in 2017, when they were going through the spoils from the money pit, they found a gold-plated button. Now, whether a gold-plated button equates to a gold button on this list, I don't know, but they're both buttons and they both had gold on them.
Yeah. Well,
the final one, though, is the big kicker, because they also pulled up a piece of parchment in 1897. It's very small. It has 2 letters on it. You may have seen photos of it. I don't know.
Yeah, they talked about it, I think, in season 2. They talked exclusively about that one.
Yeah. So, and I didn't even know where the thing was or if it still existed. I'd seen a lot of photos, but when I was riding up to New Ross with Rick and Doug, we were in one of those vans where they have the hidden cameras and all that.
Mm.
And we were just talking about items, and I mentioned that parchment, and he said, "Well, I own that." And I said, "You own it? It still exists?" And he said, "Yeah, I own it." And I'm like, "Wow," and I wanted to see it, but you have to walk a fine line of what you're requesting from the big guys, whatever.
Yeah.
But then this last season, they actually showed it on the show, and they had it in that little archive room, and they put a microscope on it and put it up on the screen so you could see it. Well, what he told me that day was that they absolutely tested it to be parchment. They had not tested the ink or tried to do DNA, which you can do because it was sheepskin, so it was biological, or carbon dating, because it was so small, they would destroy it. So they were trying to figure out what the best step forward was with the parchment, because if it's so small that you're probably going to destroy at least half of it. And do you want to do that? Because it's such a artifact that was found in the money pit that, so that's where they're at on that right now.
Yeah, and since the money pit is flooded in, if there was any more parchment down there, it would have been completely destroyed after the flood in.
Exactly. And the flood in happened back in 1804, and they found this in 1897, which means this parchment was down there for 93 years in a water-filled pit. But the last item on the treasure list said a grit. This is pretty much verbatim, a grit cloth bag containing therein the title deeds to the castles. Well, I didn't know what grit cloth bag meant, and I was thinking of grit cloth like that sandpaper you buy to sand metal down with when you're working on your car or whatever.
Yeah.
So I rode over to my folks in Scotland, and they said, no, grit meant great. It was just the way they wrote the word great back then. And the cloth bag was a canvas bag that was soaked in wax. They would put charts, particularly title deeds for properties in them, seal them up, and they actually called them seal bags. And the reason they did it was because these castles would stay in the hands of the same family for sometimes up to 100 or 200, 300 years. So they had to know that when they opened up that seal bag to sell the property, they could pull that charter out 200 or 300 years later, and it would be, the India ink wouldn't be smeared, and it would all be in the same good shape.
Yeah.
And just to prove that it works and can last, the Declaration of Arbroath, which was essentially the Scottish Declaration of Independence, was written in 1320, and it still exists today. You can still read it today because of it being on parchment. So when they pulled up parchment in 2017 that Jack found in the spoils pile, it was all smeared, but the other parchment wasn't. So that told me that other parchment was in a waterproof container until that drill bit hit it.
Yeah.
Punctured a waterproof container, which was probably a grit cloth bag.
That was wax coated.
Pick that piece up, and it was still legible. But then for the next 100 or so years, while that nobody knew what was going on down below, the water was seeping into these bags, or at least that bag, and destroying smearing the India ink all over the parchment. So now when they look at the parchment, it's all purple, smeared purple from the India ink. So now you got a 4 items that all match to some degree exactly what was on the treasure list. So now they know, because I gave them the treasure list, they know specifically what to look for. Whenever they find anything that's on that treasure list, they can put another check mark on the list. So that piece of parchment had to be for something valuable, because they told me, the people in Scotland said, parchment was so expensive that they didn't just put day-to-day documents on it. It was almost always for title deeds for property, or major agreements like the Declaration of Arbor or something like that, because it was just too expensive. You had to kill a lot of sheep to get, the parchment and whatever. So that's what I think was in there. That's what I think is being pulled out. What shape it's in is questionable, because in 1863, when they were working, they heard the pit collapse 3 different times.
Yeah.
And I believe it collapsed into an underground water-filled cavern that they didn't even know was there. And it's a debris field now. And I believe that Rick believes that too, because he's said the words debris field several times. And so I think they think it collapsed into this underground cavern, spread out, it cracked open whatever they were in, or maybe some of it isn't cracked open yet, and it spread a debris field down there. And so when they run these drill bits down, they're just pulling up bits and pieces of that debris field. They brought up the 2 human bones. You probably remember that. One was carbon dated, or they were both carbon dated from the mid 1600s to the mid 1700s. The one was of European descent, and the other was of Middle Eastern descent.
Huh.
And my question to them just recently, that somebody else actually prompted the question, was, well, if you did DNA on them, go to one of these big DNA places like Family Tree DNA and say, we will pay you. We want to submit this DNA as if it was ours today. Compare it to everybody in your database and give us an answer. And then you could see if it was one of these families from the Knights Baronet.
Yeah.
It was the McLean family, or the another family's the Wardlaw family, the McDonald family, whatever. You could say, oh yeah, by the way, the one from Europe was from Clan Campbell, and we know they were on the trip, whatever. So I just sent that off to him a while ago as a suggestion that I was given from another gentleman. But there's a lot happening, and there was this is where it gets a little dicey on what I can say, but the symbol of the Strachan clan since at least 1320 was the stag, and they actually found a thing that would imprint on old charters, a matrix they call it. Metal detectors found it, and it was the same one that was on a document from 1309. So they know that it's all legitimate. And they have tons of coats of arms with the stag on them. So the stag was very significant to the Strachan family. It still is today. It's still on their coat of arms. Well, this is really just absolutely wild. But one day I was thinking, well, I wonder if there's any Strachans that live around Oak Island. So I looked it up. There's about 30 of them that I found up in Halifax or Dartmouth, which is right close to Halifax. So I wrote Doug, and I said, wow, this is kind of interesting that I'm thinking it's the Strachan treasure buried there, and all these Strachans are living in that area. So he wrote me back, and he said, oh, my God, you're not going to believe it. But he said back in 1857, John Strachan owned the Nolan Cross lots and sold them. Now you got a Strachan right on Oak Island owning some of the most significant lots, which are the Nolan Cross lots.
Yeah, those are where the Nolan Cross lots. That's where it looks like stone ruins of a house were sitting there. Correct?
Well, that one is one where it's actually a big cross made out of dome-shaped rocks that are not from anywhere else on the island, and there's 7 of them. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them that make up the cross.
Yeah, okay, and I remember. Yeah, they plotted those with a GPS, and they saw what it created the cross by doing that. And
they've a couple theorists have come up with methods where the arms of the cross can point to the money pit. Now, they triangulate it, at least. The one thing that gets me more so than, wow, I looked up at the stars and I could take that constellation, and if I twist it sideways and shrink it a little bit, it'll fit Oak Island, which to me doesn't mean anything. But the other one is, it's a straight line from here to the money pit. Well, I'm a straight line to the money pit. So are you. I mean, a straight line goes anywhere. But when you can triangulate it and get two lines to go to it, now you've got something going. And one of the recent theorists on there showed a way that some of the arms from Nolan Cross would point to triangulate to the rough area of the money pit, and where he pointed to was the last place they dug that you saw on the screen a couple episodes ago.
But the Nolan Cross, can we honestly believe that the topography of the cross has not been changed by the massive bulldozing that was done? I think it was back in the 60s, where so much of the topography was completely destroyed.
Well, that's the one thing that did not get touched. It was Robert Dunfield, and he bulldozed the Money Pit Hill, which is quite a distance away, and he bulldozed Smith's Cove, which also Dan Blankenship had done a lot of work in Smith's Cove, and then this year they did a ton of work there and found about 6 different structures down there that are unexplained, that they're still getting carbon dating on them and that kind of stuff. But yeah, nobody touched nobody touched Nolan's Cross. For one reason, Fred Nolan owned it, and he didn't let anybody on his property. He didn't even let the Laginas on his property. It wasn't until he passed away.
And his son,
what the heck, you might as well, So, and it was a shame because he just made an agreement with Rick, talked him into it, of making an agreement. He soft sold him a little bit there and got him to agree to cooperate, and then he passed away. So now that left them in the lurch. So Rick and Doug went to his son, who owns a construction company on the mainland, and said, your father did all this work. You're not invested in it like he was, but we are. And if we could throw in together and look at his drawings and metal detect your property and everything, who knows what we're going to. So they made some kind of a deal, and he said, yeah, have at it. So that's why it was protected. But the other thing about it is Al Strachan, well, first of all, I got to back up to 1630. The land around Oak Island and New Ross was granted as part of a larger grant to the former French governor of Acadia as to form an alliance with the new Scots governor, who was William Alexander. And the witness to the charter was Al Strachan. So now you have Al Strachan stealing the treasure right when they needed it. You have him, the third Freemason. You have him signing as a witness to the property in that general area, the larger general area there. And now in the 1800s, you got John Strachan owning the Nolan Cross lots on Oak Island. And he's also a Freemason in Halifax. And this one that I just discovered, I actually put parts of this in my book on the Saturday before my appearance on Tuesday. That's how recent it was.
Wow.
Dalhousie University up in Halifax has been connected with Oak Island in a number of ways. One is that the Oak Island Association that was formed after the boys dug the pit and gave up, and they had to bring a syndicate in to do it. They met at Dalhousie University when they wanted to translate the 90-foot stone. They took it to the language teacher at Dalhousie University. Well, Dalhousie University was founded by the Earl of Dalhousie, and he was formerly the Grand Master of the Scottish Freemasons until he became the governor of Nova Scotia. Well, the book that I found the treasure in and found the first three Freemasons in was dedicated to two more earls down from him. It was this guy's nephew, who was at the time the Grand Master of the Scottish Freemasons, and he was the acting Grand Master of the English Freemasons.
Wow.
So the Freemasons are 1,000% tied into this.
Yeah, you can see the connections all over.
And their last name was actually Ramsay, not Dalhousie. They were from a place called Dalhousie in Scotland, so they were the Earls of Dalhousie, but their actual family name was Ramsay. Well, David Ramsay, who was tied in with Sir William Alexander in the court of the king, he becomes a Freemason, and the three sponsors, if you want to call them that, or witnesses for him, are William Alexander Jr., Anthony Alexander, and Al Strachan. The first three Freemasons are his sponsors for him to become a Freemason. And it was from him that the Earls of Dalhousie descended, that started Dalhousie University an hour away from Oak Island, and who were the leaders of the Freemasons. And most of the people that spent money in previous digs were Freemasons. FDR was there. He was a Freemason. John Wayne was an investor. Errol Flynn and Admiral Byrd, they were all Freemasons. They were all invested in it. A lot of names that you wouldn't know unless you were an Oak Island fanatic, but people like Frederick Blair and the Chapels, a bunch of people like that were all Freemasons too. And even today, Charles, who is a Freemason, Charles Barkhouse is a Freemason, he gives private tours to Freemasons a couple times a year on Oak Island. So, I mean, there's just so darn many coincidences that what is the other explanation? That's what I always go to. All right, I came up with this by going through tons of old documents over 2.5 years, and nobody else has come up with anything else that explains all this. So I might not have all the facts exactly right. I might be wrong on a year or a person's first name or whatever, but the bigger story has to be the story, because they're just, what else, there is no other explanation for all of this converging at this little area between Halifax, New Ross, and Oak Island would make a nice little triangle right there of all this activity. And there isn't anything else to explain it. And nobody else has ever. Now, two other historians did start down this path. They both mentioned William Alexander, and one of them, Mark Finnan, he wrote about 3 books on Oak Island back 30 or 40 years ago. And he actually said that William Alexander is a good suspect because of all his contacts in Scotland, the fact that he was given Nova Scotia, and the fact that the carbon dating, he must have done the same thing I did, because he said a lot of the carbon dating matches the same date Alexander was there. But he didn't take it any more. That was like a half of 1 page in his book.
Huh.
Whereas I've written 3 books now, And not saying anything bad about him. I'm just saying that here he was heading down that path. And then another historian, Court Lindahl, he's written a ton. And Court kind of takes every theory about Oak Island and explores them in his books. He's not necessarily sold on one. He's very expansive in regard, even including astronomy and all that. But he also mentioned the Alexanders and the significance of them there. But again, he didn't go down the path that I did. So nobody's gone down this path anywhere near as far as I have.
They hit it, but they never followed it.
They never followed. They saw it and they said, "Wow, that looks like a nice path." And then they didn't walk down it. I walked it down it. So there isn't any other theory that's got this much documentation, and it continues because I can't really say what was found or how it was found or anything, but several items were found that right by Oak Island that have the stag motif on them.
Yeah.
And that it was dated from the 1600s. So now you have, and John Strachan, not only did he own the Nolan Cross Loss and was a Freemason, but he had a ship that he called the Stag. So,
another connection again.
And they all came from Aberdeen in Scotland. I traced all the families back. I connected how he related to Alexander Strachan and how the family split into 2 branches. But the one branch ended up at Halifax. And so there's just these endless connections of all these family names, particularly Strachan, Alexander, and Ramsey right now are the big three names. But there's a lot of other ones. There's probably a couple dozen other ones involved. But these are the three big ones that, you know, Alexander's given Nova Scotia. He needs money. He gets these people off of the crime. Strachan's the one that steals the treasure. He signs as a witness. A relative of his down the road owns the Nolan Cross lots. And Ramsey, they found Dalhousie University, where the Oak Island Association meets and where the language teacher worked that translated the stone, you know. So that's right now, that's I'm kind of exploring on the show. When they had me on the show, they didn't mention the word Freemason at all. They talked mostly about the Templars, but they did mention the book where I found the treasure in, which was Edinburgh Lodge number 1. And I have to tell you how I found that, because it's a rare book. And Cal Hancock, who has been Doug Kroll's partner in a website called Blockhouse Investigations for a number of years, all about Oak Island and anything they could find on Oak Island and their analysis of it and all that. He was, and may still be, the Grandmaster of, no, not Grandmaster, the Grand Historian of the Grand Lodges of Nova Scotia, which includes about 88 Freemason lodges. And so he told me, maybe you want to go find these two books. He gave me these names of these two old books. Well, I went looking for them. I couldn't find them anywhere, but I tripped over this other book, and it was held by Cornell University, and they had scanned it in and had a free PDF of it. And that's how I was able to find all this stuff. So even though Cal hadn't sent me to that book, I still credit him with heading me down that path to find that book. And so a lot of these other books, like there's this other book I found, somebody approached Doug about it, and it was supposed to be by a guy named James Burness. And she had a rough idea of the name of the title, and it was supposed to have 12 Templar treasures in it that were held by the Freemasons. So, but they couldn't find it. So I went through all my sources in Scotland, and nobody could find it either. So it was like this book didn't really even exist. And then somehow I made a final attempt, and the guy's name was not Burness, it was Burns. And when I put in Knights Templar James Burns, there it came up. It was scanned in by Rutgers, I think, or somebody. And there was the book, and it had the Templar treasures in it. Now, they weren't treasures like the Ark of the Covenant or anything like that.
Yeah.
They had like a gold-plated spurs that one Templar had used. They had a helmet and visor that another Templar had used. They had a Templar battle flag. So there were 12 different treasures. They're all written in French, and I took French in school, but I don't really read it. So I had to use a translator, and I translated them entirely, all 12 of them. And then if there was anybody mentioned or any place mentioned, I went in and did further research on those people or those places so that I could give them this whole package back to Doug. That was, I found the book, here's a PDF of it, here's all your Templar treasures all translated. Well, none of that had anything necessarily to do with my story, except for the fact that the Freemasons were the ones that held the Templar treasures.
Yeah.
And to go back to the Ramsey name for a minute, I just got this the other day from a guy, and that was what I was working on today, which I sent a little email off today. But a Michael Andrew Ramsey gave a very significant address, famous within Freemasonry, to the Freemasons in 1736, outlining how the Freemasons developed out of the Crusaders. Now, he didn't mention Knights Templar specifically, but he mentioned the Crusaders, and he mentioned the Knights of St. John, which was a order with. They actually inherited a lot of Knights Templar land and all that when they were dissolved. And so here he's a Ramsey too, and so the gentleman that told me about him said, "Can you trace him back to these same Ramseys?" So I did some work today that gets them pretty darn close. And I always like to get like a second, like if I say, oh yeah, this has got to be it, then I go back in and drill down for a second or a third proof of it before I say that, because I don't want to look like a fool and then have somebody write 10 days later and say, well, you're so wrong. It wasn't even the same family or whatever, So that's where I'm at on that. But I wanted to spill the beans to everybody that now we have another Ramsey connection. We have the Dave Ramsey that was initiated into the Freemasons under William Alexander Jr. and Anthony and Al Strachan. We have the Ramsey that started Dalhousie University. We have the Ramsey that this book was written to that talked about the treasure. And we have another Ramsey who spoke to the Freemasons in a famous address about how they were connected to the Crusading Knights.
The Crusading Knights. So yeah, which it makes sense. They're not going to openly say that they were part, descendant of the Knights Templar when the Knights Templar was still excommunique from the Catholic Church anyway.
Right. And a lot of the connections are that back in the day, there was a Knights Templar with that name. And then later on, up in the 1600s, there was a Knights Baronet with that last name. And then there were Freemasons with that last name. And then there were people in the area around Oak Island with that last name. So it's the same family and same clan. And, the apple doesn't fall much from the tree because this is really how I got into all this writing was through genealogy, not through the nitty gritty of it, but through the story behind it all. And what I found is that if your names, now there's some names like Smith and maybe McDonald and Johnson that it's not going to hold true for necessarily. But a name like mine, like McQuiston, we know we're all from the same guy because about 2 or 3 dozen men took the DNA test, no matter how the name was spelled or even pronounced, because some of them pronounce it different. They actually said we were a very tight bunch that went back to a guy 500 years ago. Well, we knew the guy because that was already in our family tradition. We knew who the guy was.
Yeah.
Named Bushton McDonald, and his sons became McQuiston. And the Surreyan McDonald McQuiston, he descends from that line, as I do. And so if you have an odder name like Strachan or Ramsey or McQuiston, you're like 99% going to be related, unless there was an adoption or something like that. Some bizarre thing happened. If it's within the last 400 or 500 years, you're going to be related somehow. If you trace it back far enough. Whereas with a name like Johnson, some could have come from Norway, and some could have come from Scotland, some from England, whatever, and they may not even have ever known each other. So it's harder with names like that, but it's easier. The more obscure your name is, the easier it is to trace it back. It's odd, but because the more likely every single reference you ever see about that name is your ancestor or forefather. So where I'm at on this right now with this part of it is I'm trying to further explore this nexus between these early Freemasons, how they were related and interacted with each other, and how their heirs ended up in the area of Halifax in Oak Island. And I think that could probably be a book on its own, but I don't know if I want to write another book. It takes a lot out of you. I want to tell you, anybody that says something about, oh, it's just a book, he's trying to sell a book. I mean, spend 9 months or a year almost every day and staying up sometimes till 3 or 4 in the morning and going, spending money to get this translated or whatever, I mean, you got so much time and money into the things, and the royalties on them are not that great to where, the people like, what is it, James Michener or, people that level, they're millionaires,
Yeah, they're names.
I'm never going to be a millionaire. I'm doing this for the love of trying to figure this damn story out.
Yeah, and get it's honestly, for something like what you're doing right now, and listening to this and seeing, Kevin Whitmore said it's fascinating. It makes the world such a smaller place, and it's really amazing thinking about something like Oak Island. And I think, honestly, from everything that I've been hearing, I think your theory behind this whole thing. I think it's probably the best put together theory that I've heard from the island, period, because it all makes sense. You've got the location of these 3-4 names all within a small area around Oak Island. And when you back up another 100 years or 50 years, you have that connection of those names again in Scotland. Yep. Prior to everything actually kicking off. And there's no such thing as a small coincidence, especially when it comes to something like this. We got these names connected to a missing treasure in Scotland, and then all of a sudden these names are now founding Nova Scotia in the New World. And it's
Halifax, and founding the first Masonic Lodge in Halifax.
Yeah.
Founding the university in Halifax. I agree with you 100%. And it almost doesn't matter how far you go back, because the Keith family, which was the Marshalls, that their treasure was stolen, they went all the way back to David I, who financed the Templars and gave them all kinds of property in Scotland. The Strachan family went all the way back to a guy named Walter Gifford, who his brother was a Templar, William the Templar, they called him, and he was the ecclesiastical advisor to David I. And my family, the McQuiston family, goes all the way back to a guy named Angus Ogg, who led Templars at the Battle of Bannockburn, and who some people feel was wounded in the Holy Land fighting in the Crusades, and came back up and died on an island in Scotland, off the coast of Scotland, and is buried there. So, pick a family,
Yeah.
And then all you got to do is start looking, and pretty soon, the McLean families, John McLean Smith, go back to James McLean, the Freemason, and Lachlan McLean, the Knights Baronet, and Lachlan McLean, the Knights Templar. So there's tons of families. In my second book, Oak Island 1632, I actually explore quite a few of the families. I'd say I'm betting maybe 20 families where I take what their link was to the Templars to show that there is this link between the Templars and the Knights Baronet. And some of the connections are through land. Like in the case of Alexander, his family inherited or was granted 2 plots of Templar land, which they still own, and they have a castle on it today. One of his partners was Robert Gordon. Well, they actually own an old Templar castle still today. They still own this Templar castle from the 1300s. The Campbell family was one of them. They they have a story within their tradition of a Templar who, after they were dissolved, he dressed in beggar's garbs to make his way back to Scotland, because he didn't want to get killed on the way back, but he kept his Templar mantle with the red cross on it underneath his ragged clothing. And then when he got home, to prove that it was him, because he'd been gone so long, he just, took off his junk clothes, and there was his Templar garb underneath it. So there's just so many families that were part of the Knights Baronet that have some kind of link to the Knights Templar and forward to the Freemasons. And I got to tell you this little story. I know we're probably going long on time here.
No, it's fine.
But I was asked when the word got out in the local papers and everything that I was working with Oak Island people, the lodge up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is about a half hour from me, they asked if I would come and talk. They wanted me to talk for 1.5 hour about the connection, what I thought the connection was between the Knights Templar and the Freemasons. And they said specifically, don't talk about Oak Island, just talk about this connection. Well, you already know from hearing my story that it'd be almost impossible to tell even that part of the connection in a half hour, but I took on the challenge. So I've never been in a Masonic lodge before, and I walk in, and it's this big hall with these kind of theater seatings going up about 5 or 6 rows all around it, plush, velvet, royal color, and they put me at a podium in the middle of the room, and I'm like, holy cow, let's talk about intimidation, So, but they were kind. But one of the guys that came up to me while I was getting ready, he was a pretty old guy, and he said, I want to tell you, I've been looking for 40 years for any connection between the Freemasons and the Knights Templar, and there just isn't any. And I said, well, I'm not here to argue that there is. I'm just going to show you what I've found, and you guys can make up your own mind. He said, all right. So he listened intently. So I got done with my half hour. I was watching my iPhone to make sure I wasn't going over. I get done, and I said, well, are there any questions? The next hour they spent asking questions about Oak Island. I wasn't even supposed to talk about it, and they questioned me for another hour about that. So I got done, and so I was selling some books and talking to people, and they were showing me some of their documentation, and I was showing them some of mine. And this old guy was standing in the wings the whole time. And then when everybody left, he came up here and he said, I can't believe it. He said, I've spent 40 years on this and trying to find out what you found out. He said, I think you have the connection I've been looking for 40 years. And boy, did I feel good about that, because even the most ardent skeptic they had in the room was coming up and saying, yeah, I believe you, So I've had such good response from people. I've given a lot of talks at higher education centers, and they have smaller rooms, like 20 to 30 people, but they're always sold out every time I do it. And then the local library opened it up for me to give a talk, and the paper in here, he put it in the paper, and their room capacity was only 125 people. They filled it up and turned 30 more people away. And I sold a ton of books that day. I want to tell you, I sold a ton of books. And that was my best day ever for book sales. But they're all available on Amazon. Now, they're through Amazon's distribution, they're supposed to be available at some brick and mortar stores and like at other agreeable booksellers besides Amazon.
Yeah.
But principally, I always send everybody to Amazon because they're all right there listed right in a row. And I actually publish through Amazon. So, of course, I want to go through them. But I also purchase them in bulk, not a lot of bulk because it costs me too much money. But,
yeah, of course.
If I have 3 talks coming up, I might buy 100 or 120 books. And then I'll be able to take them to the talks and sell them that way too. So, but I'm not getting rich on it. And anybody that thinks I'm just doing all this, I mean, I'm retired now, and I obviously need the extra money. So I love it when somebody buys the book. But I just want everybody that's in. There's 3.5 million people that watch Oak Island. I want all 3.5 million of them to know this theory, however they can get it, because it's this theory compared to some constellation that happens to fit Oak Island if you twist and turn it and resize it the right way, or just a generic, the Knights Templar team here, or just a generic, the Vikings or whatever. With
the Egyptians, I've heard it all.
Yeah, the Egyptians and the Romans were there too, And I think aliens in UFOs were there. Some people,
I'm sure some of those ones have been showing up, but they just haven't made it onto the air.
And I know in your world, because I did just a very small amount of detecting and I had no idea what I was doing, but I was lucky in a couple cases. And, once you find it, you want to find out what it is, and you want something concrete. You don't want somebody to say, I think a UFO dropped that. You want to, and one of the finds that I made was pretty cool was a little truck at a lighthouse. The place had never been scanned, and we weren't actually supposed to be there, but one of the board members asked me to, and I just rented the wrong kind of detector, that would detect a pop cap or anything. Yeah. But we got lucky.
There's no such thing as anything that detector that doesn't.
Yeah, well, this was one for it was from a hardware store to detect where gas lines were or where stakes for surveying were and that kind of stuff. So when I was in the right place, I was getting hit every 2 minutes, but everything I dug up was junk. But at this lighthouse grounds, we were right off the side of a path because I had read that if that's a great place to metal detect because things would fall on the path and roll into the ground and get lost. And there happened to be a tree right there. So we were going along the edge of the path, and we hit a big hit. Dig it up. It's a little truck from the 1930s, and there was only one ever there was only ever one young boy that lived at that lighthouse with his parents who were the keepers. And that was the period that he lived in. Oh. So logic says that he is the actual guy. We know his name and everything. He's gone now, but that he is the actual guy who lost his truck next to that tree when he was playing, and it got buried in leaves and then dirt and whatever until I walked by with a metal detector and pulled it out, And so beautiful. I know that you guys want verification. You don't want just, I found a bunch of junk. You want to, if especially if it's something unique. And that's kind of the way I am. I'm detecting through these books, and I want them verified and connected and whatever. And they're up there digging in dirt, trying to do the same thing. So we're all trying to find our treasures and verify them the same way, kind of.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. The more people that read this, it's just like, you have your theories. Maybe somebody that's reading it might have something that connects further to exactly what you're saying. Maybe there's a Ramsey in Washington State who can trace his family back to the Nova Scotia area 300 years ago. And that might be the one little clue that you needed. Somebody might own the deed to the island from back at that time. They might have it in their paperwork and they just haven't been paying attention to it. You never know what can be out there. So the more people that get this information, the more we can spitball around this stuff. And, honestly, you've created the biggest spitball I've ever seen. I'm not gonna argue on that one, but there might be just, somebody might be able to put that one little clue in there that could solidify your theory.
And right now, they've requested that I work with two people that could be those kinds of people, and one of them I can't talk about at the moment. No, but the other one is he wrote a book with a partner. Back several years, and it talked about William Phipps. But in their mind, they had thought that he had taken part of that Spanish galleon treasure up there. But, so they asked me if I would, the partner that was really hot on that idea has passed away. But the Oak Island team asked me if I would work with the other partner and share information back and forth on Phipps and see what we could decide. So they gave me his email address and I wrote him, and he said it was my partner that was really into the Concepcion Spanish galleon treasure. Mm-hmm. That wasn't ever high on my list, but we did do a lot of research on Phipps, and a lot of it's not in our book. We have a little booklet. So I'm going to send you the little booklet and a copy of my book. And then when you're done scanning or reading the little booklet, send it back to me with a copy of your book. So that's just That's just happened last week, and I haven't got it yet. So that's going to be a whole new, I'll be able to add all the William Phipps research they did to all the William Phipps research I did and fill in, it'll just keep, it's like a tapestry. This is the way I think of it. It's like a tapestry. You're looking through the backside of it. So you can basically see like it's a deer running through the hills or whatever, but you can't, you don't see that clarity that you want. But the more it's filled in, the more that tapestry's filled in, the better you see the big picture. And so I'm going to be working with him. And then this other gentleman wrote a book, but it's not out yet. And it's top secret. I was told by both Doug and Prometheus, keep my damn mouth shut.
Okay, so do that.
But it talks about a whole new thing that might verify my theory. And so I don't even know I've never seen any of the writing in the book or anything. So all I know is they've told me a little bit about it and then said, if you hear anything or whatever, don't say anything, because we're right in the, when you're going up that hill of research, you don't want to get tripped, right? Just as you're getting to the top and fall all the way back down, you want to keep that momentum going. And so you don't want anybody out there, including, they respect me as a researcher, but they don't want me to be the guy that trips them up as they're getting to the top of their hill.
Yeah.
On it. And they're going to share it all with me when they're done, but they're not going to share it with me before. So I was just told, this much now. That's all that's all you know. And if and otherwise we're going to have to kill you. Yeah.
So your episode just aired on April 9th. The episode is season 6, episode 20. It's called Short Days, Tall Nights, like as in Knights of the Round Table. Yeah.
Nova Scotia. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely check it out. Now, I have questions. I have a couple questions. Now,
okay.
If we're talking about Templars that are coming out of England, I want to go back to the cross again that's on the island. Now, the orientation, has anybody actually looked into two things that has to deal with the cross? And I know this is kind of, I'm kind of getting into a weird subject, but if we're dealing with Templars, or if we're dealing with, Freemasons, we're going to be talking about angles and directions and everything else. Especially if they're going to try and mark an area where something has been buried without putting a big arrow on the ground pointing straight at it. So a cross like the one that that we know about, with the 6 stones, I believe it's 4 stones going in the vertical and 2 on the cross.
Yeah.
Do we know the distance between stones? Has somebody measured the distance between the stones, the angles from each portion of the cross, to try and figure out a correlation between an ancient measuring system?
I believe they have for the ancient measuring system, but recently 2 theories were put forth. One was the one that was on the show just before mine, where he was able to connect points on the cross that pointed almost directly to the money pit, and the point that he triangulated to was the last one that they dug when they had a bunch of problems there. But another gentleman, it was online, it's still on there on YouTube, and he had what I thought was a totally cornball theory, and it was about the way something on the dollar bill, that if you compared it to Nolan's cross, or held a miniature sized Nolan's cross to the bill or something, it would point to the money pit. And I thought, well, my God, how far are you going to stretch this thing with crazy theories? But I looked up that design on the dollar bill, and it was designed and designed under and approved by Franklin Roosevelt.
Somebody who actually visited the island.
Who actually worked there. Excuse me. His grandfather Delano, he got that name. His middle name is Delano from his mother's side. And his grandfather Delano was a investor in Oak Island. And he had made millions they say in the opium trade from China. He was a shipping magnate, and
could have been at that time.
His family had come from one of the other ships that came with the Mayflower. That's how early they had gotten into that same area. So there's another family, the Delano family, that you could say you could potentially, and I might in the future do it, but try to track them all the way from when they landed there, who was related to who, how it got down to grandfather Delano, how he invested in Oak Island, and how he told his grandson Franklin about it. And Franklin never quit loving it. He even after he had become disabled and towards the end of his career, he had gone up to Halifax and with the intention of going over to Oak Island, but at the time there was no causeway, and the only way he could get there was on a small boat and come up to the island and then go up Smith's Cove up over the hill to the money pit. So with him being in a wheelchair, the logistics just made it impossible. So instead, some of the searchers at the time went to Halifax and met with him there. So that was the best he could do. But one of the people that owned a good share of the island in the 30s, he's the guy that built the road by the swamp, as a matter of fact, same guy. He wrote a letter to Franklin that still exists, and he said that he felt, essentially paraphrased, he felt the money pit could have been built as early as 1635. And my theory says 1632. That's only 3 years off out of hundreds of years of searching and hundreds of years of it being buried there, whatever. He's only 3 years off from mine. And he based his totally on the way maps were drawn. He explained it somehow, or I don't know if he really explained it in the letter or just said that that was his source, but he was explaining it on maps and how they were drawn and how he came about to. He actually said from 1635 to 1645 was his target time for the burial, which what's interesting about that is this was before the days of DNA.
Yeah.
So we didn't even, or not DNA, but
carbon dating.
So we didn't even have those carbon dating records that showed that window of 1620 to 1660. His window was 1635 to 1645. And my target date was 1632. Yeah. So it's like three different, talk about triangulating. We've got three different sources coming together, pointing to roughly that time period, that there is no other real evidence, not real evidence. You know, there's a lot of theory, but there's no other real evidence that points to that, anything but that time period. Yeah. And the only people that were involved there at that time period were William Alexander and Al Strachan and that crew, the Ramseys and all that, you know. So it's very exciting to be in on this. But first of all, just to be in on the show that I was a fan of before I even wrote them. Yeah. But also, I'm a Scottish historian, you know, even though I live in the United States, I'm a recognized Scottish historian. And I've been researching clan histories for 20 or 30 years. So it's all coming together for me. Yeah. I'm not making it up. That's the thing about it. I mean, I might, like Rick said, he was 100% right at the very closing scene there when he was by himself in their film. And he said, the real theories are recognized by the way they connect the dots. And James has connected a lot of dots. Now, he said, now, granted, a lot of facts into dots. And he said, now, granted, some of the facts are interpretations of the facts, but there's a lot of dots that are forming a really nice picture. And that's exactly what's happening. It's kind of like me saying the back of the tapestry. Yeah. And I don't think it's even, I kind of hate to say it because I've already dedicated almost 3 years to this, but I don't think it's even remotely over.
No, because of course not.
What I found in the last few, you know, about the Ramseys and their connection, and you know, it continues almost every day. And Rick called me. It was funny because he's called me 4 times. The first 3 times I was sitting down, and I felt like I needed to sit down further into a chair. And he's so polite and gentlemanly. He's just the nicest guy. But this time he called me, which was just about a week ago. I was up on a stepladder with a hose in my eaves, Charles, trying to clean all the crap up. And he calls, he says, Mr. McQuiston. He calls me Mr. McQuiston, you know, and he said, this is Rick Lagina. I wondered if you had a few minutes to talk. And I said, well, I'm at the top of a stepladder with a hose in my gutters, but I'll get right down. He said, oh, I don't want to bother you. I'll call you back. I said, no, you won't. Don't hang up. Don't hang up. So I got down off the ladder, went over, shut the hose off, and went and sat on the steps. And I said, okay, what's going on? So that's when he told me Prometheus was going to call me again to talk about a few things. And he said, I don't really know what they are. It's none of my business. But so a few days later, I talked to them for a little over an hour. But again, you know, I don't know what the future holds for me as far as being involved. And I don't know where they're going specifically with their theories. I have a few clues, just like I didn't even know I was going to be on the show on April 9th. Nobody would tell me if I was even going to be on the show. And I thought, well, here, I signed this NDA saying I wouldn't tell anybody if I was going to be on a show. And I don't even know if I am going to be, so I couldn't tell anybody anyway. But I got like 3 emails, 2 from Doug and 1 from a guy from Prometheus that hinted around. Like, I don't think you're going to have to wait much longer or things like that. But, you know, they wouldn't come right out and say it. But they were keeping me hanging on because they wanted to use me towards the end of the season. So then 2 weeks before that, Rick called and said, there's only 3 or 4 episodes left, and I guarantee you're going to be on one of them because I talked personally to Kevin Burns, the owner, executive producer of Prometheus, and you are going to be on the show, but I can't tell you which one because I don't know. So he said, all I can tell you is to just keep watching. So that's the first I actually knew I was going to be on the show. And then when I knew what episode it was going to be was because of the week before they showed, the previews, and I saw me in my red flannel shirt. And I have to tell you, the reason I wore that was because most of my shirts, virtually all of them, are dark blue or black. But I own that one Woolrich type red flannel shirt, so I can be a rugged guy in the winter, whatever. Well, when they filmed me in 2017, I wore just a dark navy blue shirt, and I saw some of the footage, and I sucked right back into the wall behind me. They have good lighting, and it was like, who is this guy? You see a head bobbing around or whatever. So that's not going to happen this year, because if they're going to use me, people are going to see going to see me. So I wore the brightest shirt I had, which was that red flannel shirt. Right. I got ribbed about it. People saying, well, you could have at least wore a tie with it. Or
stand out. That's how it works.
But I was doing a local, not local, but fairly local podcast. And we had a visual going too. They just recorded it, the audio, but we had the visual going. And one of the guys was wearing a red flannel shirt, and I was wearing mine too. And I said, well, I see you wore the official uniform of Oak Island. And they were laughing. And the other guy said, you know what? We should register an Oak Island tartan, a red flannel, find a pattern that nobody else has ever used, and get it registered with whoever you register with in Scotland, and say, this is the official Oak Island tartan, and then we'll start selling products and making it. So right now, since nobody else is claiming it, I'm claiming that the red flannel pattern is
Oak Island
the
tartan.
Official tartan of Oak Island. I just don't know which pattern. I don't want to get in trouble with some big Scottish clan with broadsword.
Now, the next question, we actually have one of the guys, Kevin Whitmore. He's out there. He wants to know if you could put a good word in for him with Gary Drayton to bring his ORX. It's a XP metal detector, one of the best on the market, over and let him give a hand to help detect the area.
Okay. Yeah, he'll have to. I'll have to get his contact information, but just give me the name again. I'll write it down. Craig?
Kevin Whitmore, Whitmore.
And is he well enough known in the trade that?
Yeah, he's really good. He's using the brand new XP metal detector. Probably one of the two top of the line metal detectors that's out there, and not a lot of people. I mean, it's recently come out, but not a lot of people are as adamant with it as he is. I think he would be a great add to the show.
Well, speaking of Gary, I'll tell you a couple stories about him.
Yeah.
Since he's in your world. First of all, he isn't there full time through the summer like most of them are. They bring them in when they clear a lot, because the lots you mentioned earlier about how the deep or thick the forests are. Well, a lot of that was cut off at one point for farms and stuff, but it's like tanglewood is the best way I can describe it. So there are a lot of places you can't even walk into. So when they would get permission on different lots or determine that they wanted to explore a lot, they'd have to bring a brush hog in to brush hog it. So, so they don't want him standing around, paying them whatever for that. So they would get sites ready for him and then bring them in maybe like a month at a time. And he'd hit all these sites and he'd film it all. And then he'd go home for a while because he's got a wife and two kids. And, he's got he makes all his money on metal detectors.
Yeah.
He works on Gold Coast and he's got some booklets. He's written, I think, about 18 of them. And he gives seminars at shows, things like that. But, so he's making it however he can. But one of the ways he's making it is being on that show. And so they put him up at the same hotel where they put me up at. So I drank a lot of beer with Gary Drayton. Let's put it that way. And, of course, then your lips get looser, so he tells stories. But he's 10 times the clown in person as he is on the show. Everybody on that show is exactly who you see him, except him, because he's much crazier than that in real life. But that's not what the show's about. But So a couple of things about him. One is he used to have hair below his shoulders. And there's one picture online now, but he showed me one of him in a bar standing by a guy, and it was down to his shoulders. But I just saw one online just the other day that showed it down below the shoulders. The other thing, and this is a big story about him, but you're not allowed to treasure hunt in Spain on the beaches.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Well, he did. And what he did was he rigged up something, or he bought it, I don't know how, but it hung around the waist. So once you were waded up into the water up to your waist, nobody would know that that's what you were doing. So he would wade along, and when he got a hit, he'd just slip down into the water and dig it up and put it in a satchel and come back up and keep walking. He got caught 4 times, and sent out of Spain. And he told me in handcuffs.
Wow.
And I said, well, how do you get back in? He said, well, they've never confiscated my passport. So he said, I just wait a couple of years. Everybody forgets about it. I go back to Spain and do it again. He said, I haven't done it in years. But he said, I did that four different times in Spain, and they put me on a plane in handcuffs, sent me out of the country. So I'm like, that's how crazy the guy is. I mean, he just, he's done whatever he has, but he's found so much stuff. And that, I don't know if you've ever seen that emerald ring he found.
Yeah, actually, looking right at it. It's the gold one with the 3, 6, 9 emeralds on it.
Yeah. And he said it's the best example of a Spanish ring from that era, and that anybody's found. And I've heard, he told me he thought it was worth about $350, but I've heard online that they think it's worth about $500,000. Wow. But he's found well over $1 million worth of stuff, and he lives somewhere around Fort Lauderdale, so he's not living in a cheap place. No, and he's got a wife and 2 kids, so he's making money at it however he can. But he's a very funny guy, and he was. We were leaving. My wife and I were leaving one day to go back to the island, and he was leaving in his car. I said, "You going down the island?" He said, "No, I'm going to play Celebrity Walmart." And I said, "What's Celebrity Walmart?" And he said, "Well, I'm up here. They get me up here for a month or so. I got to have stuff. So the best place to go is to Walmart." And he said, "Everybody knows me." He said, "I can't go down a single aisle in Walmart without somebody wanting their picture taken with." So he said, "I call it Celebrity Walmart."
He sounds like somebody I should try and get on the show.
He is. And the other guy that's the card is, of course, is Dave. And but he's just like you see him. I mean, they're not holding much back on him. But he has that one favorite word that he likes to say a lot that they have to bleep all the time. Yeah. And so the first year we're there, and I'm sitting there with my wife, and we're sitting there with Rick and a few other people, but he doesn't know us from Adam, and he's just walking up to us. And my wife says, "There's the bleep bleep man." And he says, "You're bleep bleep right, except you didn't say bleep bleep." And I'm like, geez, you don't even know us. You're in mixed company. And he didn't faze him one bit, because with him, I guess that word with him is second nature, and he doesn't think anything about saying it. But we all laughed so hard about it. Rick, everybody was laughing about it, So, but he is just like you see him. I had quite a long conversation with him, and I talked with Dan Henske for a while, and my wife talked with him a lot. And he's so quiet on that show, but he's a genius. And I read some of the stuff that he wrote. He was cataloging their searches. It is so detailed and engineer-type talk and everything. And I know that's why they keep him around. He's not this big personality on the show, but he's this big brain that you don't know so much, And the only person, I didn't meet Dan, which I felt so bad about that. I didn't meet him either year. He was, I guess, not feeling well both years. And it was in early spring.
Blankenship, you mean?
Pardon me?
Blankenship?
Yeah, Dan. I didn't meet him. And now he's passed away, so I never will. And then Alex wasn't on the island when I was there, so I didn't meet him. But I met everybody else. I only met Marty for a few minutes, and he's a multimillionaire. I've heard where he's worth $100 million. Ooh. And so his attitude, is different. It's very bad. I mean, he should love my theory. He never sat in on any of the 3 filmings they did of me, but he's so pragmatic that because my theory is so pragmatic, he should be loving it. And I was told, the fact that he wasn't there, don't read anything into that, because he's a very busy man. He's got the winery, got the energy business. He got out of the oil and gas business, and he's in the renewables now.
Good.
So they said, don't read anything into that. But I only was able to talk to him for less than a 5-minute period. So that was it. But I talked to Rick many times in person, on the phone, and he doesn't email at all because he doesn't want to get into the email trap of getting 10,000 emails every day and, not getting back to people and all that. But he did answer one email one time, but that was it. And so even when he was talking to me 2 weeks ago or a week ago, I guess it was a week ago, he said, I don't want you to ever think that you're bothering us with your emails. He said, I know you send tons of emails, but he said, every one of them gets read by several people, and we all appreciate it. And even if we don't respond, we appreciate it. So he said, please keep sending the emails, because that's how this all developed. I mean, It was all piecemealed. I'd find this out this day, and it's, titled Holy Cow, and then the next time it was Holy something else, and you're not going to freaking believe this one, and so that's where this built up. And that's why they suggested I write the books, because it was going to get lost. The only place all this research existed was in all these emails.
Yeah.
So they said, you got to put this in book form before it gets lost. So essentially I printed out or I made digital copies of all of the emails I sent, so I'd have them for reference, so I could put it together. So that's how the whole thing happened, and it's still happening. I still sent them something today, and I think I sent them something 2 days ago that of significance. So it's cool. It's a lot of fun, and believe me, I keep saying I wanted to do other things in my life. I even have other books I want to write, but I'm so stuck on this right at the moment. And I was told by one of the anonymous people up there that I have islanditis, and it's a disease that there's absolutely no cure for.
Yeah, that's you see that through history. It started in 1798, I think, and it's been constantly present on that island up till now.
And everybody that gets involved, look at Fred Nolan and Dan Blankenship were both there for about almost 50 years apiece.
Yep.
They both essentially died living on the island. I mean, they weren't on the island, I don't think, when each one of them passed away. And now you got Rick. He's so, I was told by the same person that he was there 7 days a week during the season. And then Doug told me that he was putting in 10 to 12-hour days. He said, I have never seen anybody so enthusiastic and
dedicated
about anything, anywhere. He just goes. He knows no end to it. And I'll tell you a story about him that he, we were standing there talking. It was after most of the hullabaloo had gone by and everything, and we were just like doing some chit-chatting before I had to leave. And he reaches in his pickup truck and gets a chainsaw out. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he said, well, we've got dynamite planted up there, and that was that seismic drilling they were doing.
Yeah.
And just small charge. He said, we can't let the tourists get near them, so I got to go cut some new tour paths. And I'm thinking to myself, you are the star of the show. Go get one of these flunkies to cut trees and go sit in the chair and talk to the tourists. But he never quits, and his hands are beat up. And I said to him 2 times ago when he called, the day he called to tell me I was going to be on the show, I said, what appeals to me about the show, what appealed to me before I ever even thought about writing you guys is, it's just like as if I went and got some of my buddies and said, hey, throw your chainsaw and your shovel in the pickup truck and see if Billy will bring the backhoe, and we're going to go up there and figure this damn thing out. And he says, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it's been. It's just been us guys going up there trying to figure it out, and in any way they can. And they've got way more sophisticated, with the seismic drilling and the, well, I guess, I don't know if I'm revealing anything because I think it's been online, but I think they seismic drilled the swamp, which sounds like it'd be impossible. But from what I understand, and this isn't coming from them, it's just coming from what I found online already, is that they drained some of the swamp, then they sprayed or spread somehow some kind of dirt over it, and then they put 4x8 sheets of plywood. They made paths all across the swamp and set those dynamite charges across the swamp so they could see if there were any crevices or caverns or gateways to the treasure underneath the swamp too. And that's all I know about. I actually saw an aerial photo. I think a drone took it of all the plywood spread over the swamp. So I guess they did that too. And I don't know if that'll be in this last episode, or maybe if it was fruitless, they just won't bother putting it on ever.
We'll see. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's 10 billion things that they're doing there that we just don't see. Theories and ideas that they're trying, and we just don't see it because it doesn't make the air.
Oh, absolutely. And along those lines, I was filmed 3 separate days, and I would say it was a total of 5 hours probably. We did a couple hours in 2017, and we did a couple hours in the war room in 2018, and then we went up to New Ross for about an hour at the foundation. And they told me in the beginning, the first year, they said, we don't care if you talk for an hour or 2 hours, we're only going to give you 5 or 6 minutes on air. Well, they gave me a lot more than that. They gave me almost 15 minutes, so I was so happy with that. But that's the case. Now, if they did that with me, how many other people have they done that with? And I just read about a theorist today who was filmed in 2016, I think, and they brought him back in 2018, and they never used the film footage from 2016. So the point is, 5 hours for 5 minutes, of showtime, and the same thing's true going through the spoils pile. They got bucket loads of spoils to go through, but the only time you're going to see film footage is when they pull out a bone or a piece of parchment or something. But you don't see those hours and hours of digging through it by hand and spraying it with a hose or whatever. And then the paperwork. They have the tours, which sell out like a Jimmy Buffett concert, but they have to administer all that. They have, when they bring in those third-party drillers and truckers and all that, that has to have contracts somebody has to sign. The theorists, just in my case, they had to get car rental rooms and the schedule for me and all that set. If they have anything on loan in the museum, I know what museums are like because I loaned a postcard to a museum once and it generated like 5 or 6 pieces of paper, and I had to actually sign off them too, because they want to make sure that they have the right to display it in the museum or whatever. Yeah. So that they're going through that too. The permits with the government for can we dig in this place, and they're probably in triplicate, to 10 different committees or whatever. So just the paperwork alone has to be mind-boggling, and you never, ever see that on the show, ever. And this one person, I'll tell you about her, she is like, how they always say there's behind every great man, there's a great woman. Well, she's like the great woman behind all these guys. And she takes care of all of that, and admins and all. They have volunteers and other workers, but she's the key person. And she actually produced part of a big movie, the Titanic, part of the Titanic.
Oh, that small movie, you mean?
Right. And she has a lot of other like TV shows and things, but she wants to stay anonymous, and so she never gets filmed, and they never put her name out or anything, but she is the one that originally emailed me back and was the catalyst for getting me in there. And when the first day I got there, one of the first things Rick said to me was, whatever her name is, wanted you to come here so bad and tell us your theory. That was the first thing he said. So I thanked her so many times, like, you're the reason that this all got kicked off. And she's such a nice lady and everything. So there's so much, you're 100% right, that there's so much goes on that you never see. And there's probably failures that, they show a lot of the failures or disappointments, but there are probably other ones that they don't show. And so it's a big job, and it's a big job for Prometheus. And I was talking to the executive producer on site, not Kevin Burns, the big cheese, but this other guy. And he said, well, what happened was my wife and I walked up there in the morning when I was supposed to be filmed, and he looked at her and he said, you're not supposed to be here. And she said, I know. I just wanted to say hi to everybody, and then I'm going to go shopping. And he says, well, no, I'm serious. You're not supposed to be here. He said, we had a theorist come in yesterday, and he brought his son with him, and we sent him home. He didn't get to talk in the war room. And she said, all right, well, I'm going to leave in a minute. So right then, here comes Jack and Charles and Gary and Rick and a few other people probably around the corner, and they see us, and they're coming over and giving us hugs and everything. And so the producer kind of backed off a little bit. But before that happened, my wife said to him, boy, you really look tired. You look worn out. And he said, you wouldn't believe my job. He said, not only do I have to coordinate all of the filming here and everything, he said, but I got to worry about the size of the gravel on this pathway you're walking on, because if somebody trips on that gravel and breaks an ankle, I'm the guy that gets in trouble. Yep. He said, I get in trouble for everything that happens while we're here on this island. And, and you don't think of that. They're invisible. You don't ever see the camera people. And even when you're being filmed, a lot of times you don't see them. I mean, they're just so good at what they do. They film with drones, whatever, but there's just so many considerations to this whole thing that don't show in the show. And I don't know why they don't show it. If I had any complaint at all, it would be, show us some more of that nitty gritty. Don't recap so much. Show us more of them getting the truck set up or going through spoils or whatever. Show how hard people are really working.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think people would love that.
Yeah, they should do like something on the DVDs, like behind the scenes or additional footage kind of reels.
Oh, I think people would absolutely love the behind the scenes, and that's I'm telling a lot of tales out of school, but my NDA from last year is over anyway. And I'm not smearing Prometheus in any way because I have no reason to. It's not because I signed an NDA that I wouldn't. It's because I want to kiss their feet. I'm sure I'm not going to say anything bad about them, but the show is not scripted. As far as I can tell, anything that happened with me I've been on the island 5 different days and filmed 3 different days. Not once was I told what to say. One time I was told what not to say because what happened was, they arrange things okay, we're going to Smith's Cove. Make sure you got, this part of the crew go down there, and these guys are going, to the money pit, so that this part of the crew goes there. And they do that in the morning. You have a production meeting. They put them all in a circle, tell them where they're going, and the Oak Island guys are there too, so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
But after that, it's just filming and editing. So they can't know when I'm going to exactly pull across the causeway. So I got there and they said, well, we want to film you coming across the causeway. So just go back and wait and you'll hear, they gave me a walkie-talkie and they said, you'll hear on the walkie-talkie when to come over. Because we want to make sure everybody's there and in the war room and everything. So I'm sitting around the corner there and I hear Action James. And I just burst out laughing because I was already smiling from ear to ear that I was even going to be on the island and on the show. And then I hear somebody say Action James. But so I come across and I can see the drones in the air and 2 or 3 guys on the shoreline filming me coming over. And they told me, go up, pull up to next to Rick's truck, and Rick will greet you. Yeah. That's all he told me. So he does, and we're just making small talk, welcome back to the island, going in. And I didn't know that everybody and his brother was going to be in the war room because there was only 2 trucks there. And I walk in, and Jack was there, Gary, Charles, Craig, and Rick, anybody you see in that film footage with sitting there with Doug Crow. So I walk in there and I said, wow, you got the whole gang here. Yeah, I mean, I was just amazed. And the guy says, oh, we can't have that on the film. Can you just walk in again? So they had me go out the door and walk back in and not say it. So that is the only time they told me not to say something, but they never told me to say anything. And they just edit it the way they want to edit it, and you're kind of at their mercy, but I can't complain about what they did. I wish they would have mentioned the Freemasons a little more. And if they ever have me come back, that's going to be that Freemason Nexus is going to be my theme.
Yeah.
But I can't complain because they said 5 or 6 minutes. And I swear my segment was a good 15 minutes on the show. And so, and it's a complex theory. You've heard it today, how complex it is, and that's not even the half of it. If somebody gets Oak Island Nights and starts reading, they're going to say, man, this guy dug down to the deepest pits to find this stuff.
I've got you on video, and what I'm expecting you to do is turn the camera so I can see that wall where you got all those pictures and those the yarn going from one place to another.
Well, you know what? I don't know if you're a psychic or not, but you keep bringing up significant points, because I was actually just down in Pittsburgh at a Da Vinci exhibit down there, and I got this idea in my brain that this is so complex to read and to hear, but what if I could do a diagram that would show it?
Yeah.
So I actually, while my wife was driving us home, I'm downloading screenshots of different types of wall charts and bar charts and everything, and I haven't figured out which one would be best, but I'm looking for that one that would be the easiest thing for a layperson to look at, and obviously Oak Island would be the central thing that everything would radiate out about. But that's what I'm looking for right now, and I even told the guys this, that I'm trying to find a visual way where you don't have to know all the details, but you can look at this flow chart or timeline or whatever it's going to be and say, oh, yeah, you look at it for 5 minutes and then you can say, yeah, I understand it all. I mean, within reason,
Yeah.
So that's, but the one of them is exactly what you said, is like the police do for when they're trying to find a serial killer or whatever, and they've got this wall with all these notes on it and photos, and they've got the strings going every which way. And that was one of the choices of my choices, and it might be the best one, actually. It might be the best of all the choices. A lot of them are so left brain, and I am not left brain. I love databases only because you can sort. Like I could sort for the year 1632 and see what was happening, or sort for the name Strachan and see what's happening or whatever. But to ever build a database, I'm not your man. I'm not an accountant or a left brain person. But the visual, as you said, would be so cool, and that's what I need to do. And I wish to God I could turn around and show you that wall.
Yeah,
because I wished it was done.
Okay, then I'll call you back in a week or two. So you got a little time.
Might take longer than a week, but, and I'll probably more than likely do it on my computer, because I got everything crammed into my office now from all my world travels and everything that I do. That see, the reason I have an office is because my wife would never let me have this in the house.
You see my office here.
Yeah, there's just so much crap. So, and maybe 500 books and everything, So I can't cram much more in. I can walk about 10 feet to my seat in front of the computer, and that's about it. There's no sense trying to vacuum it, because you'd have to empty it to run a vacuum. But anyway, so I'll probably do it as a visual on a PDF or something, maybe even in InDesign. And then when I get it done, I'll publish it out, to as many sources as I can, because I have nothing against everybody learning the theory, even if they don't buy my book. I also would love people to buy the book. And a lot of times people buy all three of them when I do these shows, because they're all the exact same number of pages and size. And there's one that's gold, there's one that's blue, and there's one that's royal purple. So, they look nice together and all that. But as I said earlier, if all 3.5 million people that watch Oak Island tomorrow knew this theory, I'd be thrilled to death. Because if this ends up being a theory, and I use that term "if" lightly because I think it is, but if it ends up being it after 200 some years of people trying to figure it out, I'm going to be, clicking my heels a lot, And I don't. Now, one of the things you sign, this is interesting with the NDA, is you sign off any right to any treasure that's found based on your theory. But that's okay too. I mean, I never went into this for the money. I only wrote the first 2 books because they recommended them, and I saw their point that if these emails are lost, so is all your research. Blah blah blah. But again, I'm never going to turn down the little bit of royalty I get on any one of these books, and it helps support my addiction to Oak Island of finding out new information every day. And there's so much out there yet. My God, there's just, because they really recorded a lot back then, and a lot of it was handwritten, so it's had to been just transcribed, and most of it is available through universities or through organizations. It's not run of the mill on Facebook. You have to get into the university libraries or whatever, but it's out there. And when you open up a book, there might be literally 500 notations in that book that any one of them could be the one that I'm looking for.
Yep.
So I learned, and then most of them are scannable PDFs, which is the beauty of it, because I'll download the PDF and then I'll put in the word Strachan. And I'll get every note about Alexander Strachan, or I'll put in the year, just like it was a database.
Yeah.
I'm using like databases and finding stuff. And I know I've just scratched the surface, even though I've outlined what I think is the actual story. And I base it all on documents and on the DNA science, on the weather science, on the historical timeline of, not DNA. I keep saying DNA.
Carbon dating.
Carbon dating records and weather records, and everything is jiving time-wise. So luckily, because if one of them didn't, that throws my whole theory out the window. But so far, everything is, and so I'm in that place between wanting everybody to just know the theory and everybody to buy my book. But I've put so much online. I put tons of stuff online, and this is about the 4th or 5th podcast, and I'm not shy about talking about it. I mean, the only thing I hesitate to talk about is what they've told me not to.
Yeah, of course. Because
of the NDA. And I have to tell you, so I didn't know I was going to have sign an NDA for this next conversation I was having. And so we're heading to Pittsburgh, and I told them, well, call me about 5 because we'll be there, and I'll just make sure I'm free. So on the way, I get an email that says, you have to sign this NDA before we can talk to you. I'm like, what? I'm driving down Route 79 to Pittsburgh. How am I going to do this? So we looked for a print shop that could download it. I could sign it. They could fax it. We get out in the country at a totally bogus listing. There's a cow out in the field, so I know it's not a print shop. So they happened to call me as I'm leaving there, and they said, did you see that you need to sign that? And I said, yeah, I'm trying to figure something out. I'm on the highway trying to get down there. And I said, well, what if I do a screenshot on my iPhone and then sign it with my fingernail in the app? Would that suffice for now? And he said, yeah, do that, and do a formal email to us saying that you accept the DNA or the NDA. Well, isn't that funny? DNA and NDA. I never thought about it before. But anyway, that you accept the NDA, and then later we can do you can formally sign it and fax it to us, and that'll be sufficient. So we do the screenshot. Well, my fingers are so big and I have no nails. So it was like a gigantic magic marker signing this little thing. But my wife says, I'll sign it for you with my fingernail. So she uses her fingernail and signs it. And then I write the formal email, and then we send it off to him. And I said, will this suffice? And then he wrote back and said, yeah, we'll call you at 5. So they did. So that's how I got through that one. But how are we doing on time? Do you have time for a couple more stories?
A couple more. We're at 2:28 right now. It looks like I'm going to be splitting this up into a 3-episode released podcast. So that'll be coming out probably over the course of the next week.
Well, do you have any more questions on your end from anybody?
No. I just got, Kevin had one question. He had a question about, has the team considered that this whole thing on the island is a smokescreen by the Knights Templar or the Masons, just set up to throw people off the scent of something?
Well, I think that, if anything, they've considered the idea that it might be a smokescreen by searchers trying to get investors by, saying they found things or whatever so that they could get a bunch of money so that they could play around being treasure hunters for free, type of thing. But the larger point about it is that something happened because there's been too many finds. Why are 2 human bones 150 feet down in the ground?
Yeah, why is there cross-hatched wood?
Why is all these ship parts being found either on Smith's Cove or in the swamp? Why was Nolan Cross built?
Yeah.
So there's too many anomalies for something to not have happened there. So what they're trying to do is figure out what the heck that something was based on whatever available evidence there is, all the old records, the drilling, their own drilling tests that they've done. You know, they've done a ton of core drilling.
Yeah.
Probably most people don't even know they did. Just like 2-inch core drillings. Before they did those 8-inch core drillings when they found H8, where they did 43 of them, I think, and they gridded it off like every 5 foot.
H8, that's where they did the core drilling, and they found the wood planks that were laid in opposite directions, correct?
Yeah, they found the bones, and they found some of that stained parchment and bookbinding material, leather.
Okay.
They had all that tested. All that was found in there, so they were pretty sure they were on it, and then they put down Gal 1, which they named for their parents.
Okay.
And I don't know the first 2 names. But anyway, Gal was obviously for Lagina. And somehow they missed it. They got some stuff out of there, but it wasn't like as rich as what H8 was. So they've continued to, well, they were guessing a lot. So that's why they wanted to do the seismic drilling, because if the dynamite shocks would point out a decent sized cavern and it was in a direction they intended to go anyway, that would be a place that they would go. And that's what they have been doing. And this recent one was the one that the guy pointed out by drawing from Nolan's Cross. And that's the one where they found these really long timbers that were definitely cut with an axe or an adze, as they called that one tool. They were definitely hand cut, and they weren't quite the size of railroad ties, but they were probably half the size of railroad ties. And there were tons of them in there. I mean, quite a few. You know, they were pulling them up, and that's the first time that they ever found that quantity of reasonably intact wood that large that was definitely cut by hand, not cut with any kind of a sawmill or anything like that.
Machine.
And again, they're finding it down 100 and some feet. And what the hell's it doing down there? You know, somebody went to a lot of trouble to get that down there. And so I know they're working on analyzing pottery. Another thing that hasn't even been brought up at all yet, and I've been trying to work on it, is that there's one lot owned by another guy. Robert Young is his name, and he's not the movie star that played Dr. Welby. But his family's been around that area for a long time, and he owns that one lot, and he has not been cooperating with them even before the Laginas got involved. So it isn't the Laginas' fault or anything, but he has been doing his own metal detecting, and he wasn't telling anybody about it. So just a few months back, he put out a website showing some of his finds, and they were in the Bobby Dazzler category, like what Gary's finding. But one of them was a cricket badge from a cricket team.
Really?
Which is like, what the heck is that doing on Oak Island? So he actually showed it there. So I did a screenshot of it, and I wrote Doug, and I said, I'm going to try to find a place that can identify this. And he wrote back and said, well, we found a cricket cat badge. And I said, well, can you send me a photo? He said, well, we're not back to the island yet, but when we get back there, I'll try to find it in our junk that we have there and send you a photo of it. So I did write the largest cricket museum in the world, which is in England, naturally. And I sent the one image, and I haven't got any answer back from him, but I told him what the significance of it all was. So when I get the second picture, I'm going to write him again and say, you know, this is some big deal here. You guys got to, you know, because if we could trace down the team, because I looked up cricket, because, you know, there I go again, but cricket was actually started in about 1550, and then by the time the 1600s hit, it was a big gambling thing. That was the big, you know, like horse racing is, you know?
Yeah.
It could well have been, those badges could well have been lost there in the 1600s. You know, and so if they could tell me what team it was, if that record is carried forward, if the Cricket Museum could tell me what team that was, we would know if it was a Scottish team or it might tell us something. So
I'm sure
that's
they
something
can,
that's
yeah.
so peripheral, but it might tell us something when we finally get down to it.
I'm sure
But anyway,
they'll have some kind of record of that.
the two stories, actually 3 stories I want to tell you real quick. I'll get them out as quick as I can, but 2 of them concern how nice Rick is. The first year we went up, they had wanted us to come up more so than Prometheus. But they got Prometheus to pay for us, and my wife wanted to, watch me give the presentation in the war room. So she had come in and sat back in the corner. And so when the Prometheus guys came in, they said, "Oh, well, you can't stay. We've never let." I'm sorry,
that's okay.
We've never let anybody that wasn't part of the presentation or those being presented to ever be in the war room.
Yeah.
It's against our policy, because he said otherwise it would get so out of hand. So she was kind of dejected, and when she's dejected, she goes shopping with my. So I said, "Well, here's the card," So, and we had rented this big monster truck for whatever reason, I don't know why. So she gets in the truck and just gets to the causeway when she hears somebody hammering on the truck. And so she stops, and here it's Rick Lagina. And he said, "I heard what was going on in there, and you're going to be in that room." I put my foot down. And so she came back in the room, and she said, "Rick said I could be in here." And they said, "All right, well, you have to sit in that corner, and you don't say a word. Don't make any noise." And I thought to myself, my God, I've been trying to get her to do that for years, and I haven't. But she said, I won't clap. I won't sneeze. Nothing. You won't know I'm here. So she did. So she got to watch it. So that was one very nice thing. So then the next year, last year, when they called, they said they just wanted me to come up for 2 days. They were going to film me I would arrive. The next day I'd be filmed. The next day I would leave, and they would pay for 2 nights. And I said, "Well, if I want to stay a little longer, can I just pay for the extra rooms? And can you book my flight for 5 days instead?" Because I had something going on both weekends.
Uh-huh.
So I could stay longer than that. And they said, "Yeah, that's okay. As long as you pay for the extra car rental and the extra rooms, that's fine." And I said, "Well, what about my wife? You guys paid last year." And they said, "Well, that was extraordinary. We don't ever do that. We have a policy." Again, you can imagine how it would get out of hand. And so we can't do that. But she's welcome to come up if she wanted to. Well, we had such late notice that the flights were just incredibly expensive. And so we just talked it over. She said, "Well, I won't go. You just go up for, and have a good time, whatever. I've already been there, seen it all, and I have to sit. They might make me sit out." Well, they said she couldn't be in the war room for sure this time. So she said, "I'll just be sitting around anyway." So a week goes by, and Rick Lagina calls and says, "Hey, I hear they won't pay for your wife to come up." And I said, "Yeah, she's a little disappointed, but she understands." And he said, "Well, she's coming up." And he said, "I'm paying for you guys. I'm paying for her flight, and I'm paying for you guys to stay as long as you want. Within reason." And I said, "Well, we can only stay for the 5 days." And Prometheus was picking up 2 of them. He said, "Well, I'll pick up the other 3. He said, "Whatever they don't pick up, you send me a bill for it after the fact. After you get home and you get it all sorted out, send me a bill, and I'll pay it." And he did. And that's just incredible. But he said the reason why, he said, "Your wife has proofread all your books. And I know she's been a part of it. I know you've been nagging her with all the things you're finding out every day for years. And it's just not right that she can't be a part of this." But he said, "I understand Prometheus. They have to have some kind of standards to stick by, or they'd be, they would just get so out of hand." And I totally understand that, that it would be ridiculous. Everybody and his brother would want to go. And, and then they'd be liable for all those people and liable for all the bills and all that, So they have to have a standard that they stick by, and I understand that and appreciate that. So that was so nice. Now, I don't know that that'll ever happen again, but I suspect that if they asked me to come back up again, which I don't know that they're going to in any way, shape, or form.
Well, season 7 starts filming soon.
Well, and that's the thing is, like last year, when I was up there, and I said something about season 6, and Rick says, yeah, if there is one. And I said, well, it's all over the internet that there's going to be one. He said, they're guessing. He said, I don't even know if there's going to be a season 6. So what that told me was there was negotiations going on, because there's 3 entities. There's the History Channel, Prometheus, and the Oak Island team.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that there's a lot of talk back and forth about contracts and who gets what share of the pie and all that kind of stuff, that's stuff that we would never see. But I did think I saw an official, well, actually it was when Matty Blake did that show a week or so ago, when he actually said we'll see it on season 7, and one of them nodded and agreed. So I thought, well, must be there is one then. Must be they got all their negotiations out of the way this year, and there is going to be a season 7. But I did not get any indication that I would be involved in it. They were partially concerned that I wouldn't spill any beans that I knew about this new discovery, which I didn't know very much about it at all. I learned more about it from them asking me not to say anything about it than I knew. But the other was the one where I was at May. Since I was there, they wanted to know how certain things developed. So it was the first on their part, partially was a request that I don't say anything about these items that were found, which is all understandable. But they never once said, because we intend to have you come back up or anything like that, So I don't know what the future holds in that, but I do know, I can at least say, because it was on TV, that Rick Lagina said right to me while I was in the war room, we're not finished with you yet, or we're not going to let you get away yet, or something like that.
Makes sense, yeah.
But that could have just been send us more emails, send us more emails. So I don't know what the future holds as far as the Curse of Oak Island goes, but I'm still working with Rick and Doug and Craig and Charles. I have a list of people I send the emails to, that respond or, are interested. There are other people that just never responded in any way, shape, or form. So I figured, well, I'm dropping you off the email list then, because if you're showing, but like Craig, he thanks me a lot by email, and Doug and I have emailed back and forth a lot, and then Rick thanks me on the phone. So, I know they appreciate it. And he said, don't ever quit sending them, because he said every one of them's a history lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just looking right now. According to Next Season TV, they're still in the pending status for season 7 information. So it's going to be...
And, there could be 2 reasons for it. One could be the negotiations, and the other could be just a big tease like they like to do. Because, God, they don't have cliffhangers. Nobody does. I feel like I'm watching the Green Hornet when I was 14 years old again.
Wow, you did a flashback there.
Come back next week,
That's a flashback there. But anyway, we're going to have to start cutting this short. I've only got about 17 minutes. Now, people, if you want to see James McQuiston on the show, he just was on the episode number 20 from season 6 called Short Days, Tall Nights. You can check it out on iTunes, wherever you can get your streaming shows. Just a little information. When it aired that night, you made 3.05 million viewers.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a big one. And catch the season finale tomorrow night. This is April 30th. On history. It's an episode called Lost and Founding, and the write-up is the team is handed a shocking new theory that may connect the Oak Island treasure to the birth of a nation. The guys are faced with deciding whether to quit or continue, plus a preview of the Curse of Civil War Gold.
And I have an inkling of what that's about based on the theorists that they have, but I don't know if he'll even bring up this subject, but if you'll remember back when we were first talking, I told you that the Alexander family moved to Virginia and founded Alexandria, Virginia, right next to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So whether that little snippet will make it on the show or not, that's certainly a point that could be added to their little graph that they're going to make about that theory. So, so I don't discount that. I don't know if I think the Oak Island treasure made it there, but I've always credited the Scots with, basically the founding of America anyway. The Scotch-Irish, in the form of Scotch-Irish, they led the revolution. And the Declaration of Arbroath that I mentioned a while ago lasted all these years. There's elements of that are right in our own Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, and there's books out about it. And there's a story that some guy from overseas brought Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson a trunk, and in it was a bunch of books. And they think that possibly the Declaration of Arbroath was in there too. And they just brought them over there for reference, that this is, we've been fighting for freedom for 300 or 400 years. And this is what we've been through. So you guys got to keep this in mind when you're setting up what. And one of the things that was extraordinary about the Declaration of Arbroath, that was when Robert the Bruce won or became king. And it said right in it, even though he had sacrificed his family and everything and practically his life to free Scotland, it said right in there that if he isn't a good king, we'll get rid of him too. Yeah. So it was like, we're tired of taking people's crap. And we want to live a good life too. We don't mind having a leader, but that leader better lead us the right way or we're going to get a different leader. Yeah. And, those are American values right there.
That's definitely the American values.
Yeah.
Now, everybody head on over to Amazon, order yourself a hard copy of James' books, Oak Island Missing Links, Oak Island 1632, and Oak Island Nights. And based on the author's recommendation, read them Nights, 1632, and then Missing Links. Read them in backward order and get that kind of, piecing the whole history together and how it came together. Where else can they find you?
Well, I have a website at oakislandgold.com, and I have a fair amount on it, but I have a theories area that's passworded right now because some of that's in the books, and also I wanted to refine some of it because as I find out new information, you got it. It's kind of hard to go back and rewrite your book.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
If you have your theory on a website, you can do it in the afternoon.
Yep.
So, but I do give that out to some people, whatever. But then I also did a really cool studio YouTube, and it's, if you put in Oak Island Nights, James McQuiston, it should come up. And I did it with local community access TV. It cost me some money, but they did a wonderful production on it, and I give some information there too. So I would say go to YouTube for just, I don't know the actual address. It would be crazy to try to repeat that, but when I'm looking for it myself, I put in Oak Island Nights, James McQuiston, and it comes up.
Okay.
And then oakislandgold.com is the website. And actually I should put links to the video on the website too, to cross-pollinate everything. But I just find I'm retired as of 2014, and I have never been busier. And my dad told me years ago, I don't know how I ever held down a full-time job. I'm so busy. And I laughed at it. Now I don't laugh at it anymore because it's true. But part of it is you're trying to make some extra bucks because Uncle Sam doesn't pay what I used to get paid. But part of it is you get involved in these hobbies and things, and they just suck up time like you can't believe. Just like today, who would think we've been on here, what, almost 3 hours?
Almost 3 hours, yeah.
Yeah, but who would think that? And all we've been doing is chit-chatting.
Yeah.
And having fun. So
it's great fun. I love it. So, yeah, definitely check it out. We'll have the links and everything right on our website. We're going to be making an Oak Island page, so you'll be able to check that out later this week. I got to get everything put together, all of James' information, links to his books, to his website, and we'll link his video right on there as well, so everybody can check that out. James, thank you so much. Make sure you keep us abreast when you get the next call from either Marty or Rick when you're heading out there. Maybe we can do a show while you're out on the island.
Okay, and a special hello to anybody I know in Germany or Austria or Poland or any place like that, because I know a few people. So special hello to them, and thank you for talking with me. It's been fun. I just love doing this. I'm a storyteller at heart, I guess.
Yep. I love having you on the show. I just love hearing all this. So to everybody that was listening live, you got the full 2 hour and 50-minute show. This will be coming out in 3 episodes over the course of the next week. So make sure you share this with everybody you know, and maybe we can get Rick or Gary on the show in a future episode and talk a little bit more about stuff on Oak Island, how it's going. But until then, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll be in touch. We'll see you out on the field. Let's dig it up, y'all.
Bye-bye.